Monday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to the show. It's 3 p.m. I'm Martin Daubney. Tons coming up on today's show. Top story as Just Stop Oil once again launch a series of protests to bring cities to a halt. I'm going to get one of their head honchos into this studio and say, is it time for you lot to just stop? Next up, tax cuts at last. Sing hosannas. Finally, some crumbs of comfort seem to be coming our way. Rishi Sunak has hinted as much this morning. We'll cross live to Jeremy Hunt at 3:40, hopefully with some much needed financial respite. Next up, an amnesty for illegal immigrants who can't be deported to Rwanda under this government's bedlam plans. We'll be saying, is this right? Plus, we'll look ahead to this week's anticipated net immigration figures. Could be as high as 500,000 this year. And finally, he's the man with a plan, the man down under. Farage is going to take that Bush Tucker trial. We've seen a sneak preview. They're making him eat udders and teats. You heard it right. Here's my prediction. He's going to scoff it down and wash it down with Remainer tears. All that coming up on today's show. So what would you like to ask one of the top brass from Just Stop Oil? Let me know. GBviews at gbnews.com, because they're going to be coming in this studio shortly. It's going to get feisty, but that's right after your latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. We start with some breaking news. 4 men have been found guilty of murdering Ashley Dale in her home in August last year. James Witham, Joseph Pears, Niall Barry and Sean Zeese were convicted in Liverpool Crown Court of killing the 28-year-old who was shot with a machine gun in her home in 2022. We'll have more on this developing story later. The Prime Minister has promised to cut taxes carefully and sustainably. Rishi Sunak says the government can move into the next phase of fixing the economy now that inflation has been halved. Speaking ahead of Wednesday's autumn statement, he identified 5 long-term goals, which include reducing debt, building sustainable energy, supporting business and delivering world-class education.
So now that inflation is halved and our growth is stronger, meaning revenues are higher, we can begin the next phase and turn our attention to cutting tax. We will do this in a serious, responsible way, based on fiscal rules to deliver sound money and alongside the independent forecasts of the Office of Budget Responsibility. And we can't do everything all at once. It will take discipline and we need to prioritise. But over time, we can and we will cut taxes.
Boris Johnson has been heavily criticised by his former chief scientific advisor. Sir Patrick Vallance has told the COVID inquiry he's not convinced there was an effective operational response to limit the spread of the virus when the pandemic started. He described the scale of test and trace facilities as inadequate and said the urgency of action across Whitehall wasn't as consistent or as reliable as it should have been. Sir Patrick was also asked whether the Prime Minister at the time was bamboozled by the science and the graphs.
Well, I think I'm right in saying that the Prime Minister at the time gave up science when he was 15. And I think he'd be the first to admit it wasn't his forte and that he did struggle with some of the concepts and we did need to repeat them often. Certainly when I left a meeting, I would usually be persuaded that we had got him to understand what it was we were trying to say. But as one of the extracts showed that you put up there, that 6 hours later he might not have remembered what was in that presentation.
The Foreign Secretary has formally been introduced to the House of Lords. The former Prime Minister now takes the title of Baron Cameron of Chipping Norton. Lord Cameron wore traditional scarlet robes for the ceremony, where he swore the oath of allegiance to the King. There are growing hopes that dozens of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza may soon be released. US, Israel and Qatari mediators say a deal is edging closer. More than 200 people were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October. So far, only 4 have been released. It comes after the Israeli military claimed Hamas hid and murdered hostages at Gaza's main hospital. Video has been released of what the IDF says are hostages being kept in Al-Shifa hospital. Back in the UK, a father has called for proof of life of his Irish-Israeli 9-year-old daughter who was taken by Hamas. Speaking at a press conference at the Israel Embassy in London, Thomas Hand says his daughter Emily was taken into Gaza.
I was, when I first thought she was dead, I could start the process of grieving for Narkis, the mother of my older 2 kids, and I could start grieving for Emily. And then Tom. In that moment, I was just thrown back into the nightmare. And believe me, it's a nightmare.
Meanwhile, more than 24 premature babies evacuated from Al-Shifa have arrived in Egypt. Gaza's health ministry says a joint operation by the UN and Palestinian Red Crescent has made the move possible. The Hamas-run ministry also says an airstrike on a different hospital has killed at least 12 people in the north of the territory. A man has been arrested on suspicion of murder following the death of a woman in Dewsbury. Officers were called to a property in the Ravensthorpe area last night. West Yorkshire Police says a woman in her 20s was found seriously injured and that she died at the short time later. 15 Just Stop Oil activists have been arrested following a slow march through central London. The group says it's stepping up its demonstrations, demanding an end to new gas and oil licences. Dozens of protesters walked from Trafalgar Square to Whitehall on what they warned was the first of 7 days of action. The Met Police says the area was cleared quickly. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Martin.
And thanks for that, Sophia. OK, to our top story this hour. A number of Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested as they took to the streets of central London. Some were handcuffed and put into police vans as they held a slow march in the capital. The environmental group is vowing to march every day from this point until it wins, whatever that means. The campaign will last 7 days until November the 26th, demanding that the government stops all new licences for oil and gas contracts. Well, we can cross now and get all the very latest with GBNews reporter Ray Addison, who's been following the events today. Ray, you're becoming something of a thorn in the side for the Great Unwashed protesting on the streets of London. First Palestine, now Just Stop Oil. Top work to that man. So what happened today? Were the police finally getting tougher? Once again, was it tea and sympathy?
Well, the police definitely didn't hang around. They got tough straight away with Just Stop Oil, and Just Stop Oil posting on their socials showing that they are absolutely livid, saying 15 people arrested for marching for 2 minutes will now face up to 1 year in prison. This is what our democracy has become, end quote. So Just Stop Oil, they're feeling very much that they should have been given longer for their protest. Of course, the police arresting 15 activists under Section 7 of the Public Order Act. That allows them to make those arrests if they feel that a protester is interfering with road transport infrastructure. Of course, those laws beefed up earlier on this year by Parliament. Of course, that protest started at Trafalgar Square. They all met up at 12 o'clock, about 12:30. About 50 of them headed down to Whitehall. They told us that their intention was to march all the way to Parliament. When they got onto Whitehall, that Section 7 notice was issued very, very quickly, and those arrests happened very, very swiftly as well. Only a few Just Stop Oil members managed to get further than, say, around 100 metres, and they were all taken to the curbside, some in handcuffs, some were dragged, some were picked up and carried. They were arrested, and then, as you were saying, they were taken to those police vans, Martin.
OK, Ray Allison, thank you for that latest update. Well, joining me now in the studio is James Harvey, who took part in today's Just Stop Oil protest. James, you're one of the organisers of Just Stop Oil protests. How do you think the police handled today? It seems there's more of a clampdown. Before, we've seen them giving water, tea and sympathy. A lot of people out there getting a bit fed up with that. Do you think there's more of a clampdown today?
They do seem to be reacting very, very quickly and not letting people march on the streets, which is really interrupting people's right to protest. And by the way, just to say, I'm a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil. I'm not an organiser.
Right.
But I am here because people have put their freedom on the line. There are 18-year-olds, there are 19-year-olds being put on remand for peacefully marching in the street, asking for an end to new gas or oil licensing.
You say, James, that these are going to go on, these protests, until you win. What does winning look like?
Well, our demand is for the government, which we regard as a criminal government, to stop all new oil and gas licences.
Well, they won't do that, so what are you going to do next?
Well, the marches are going to continue in London, 12 o'clock every day, meet in Trafalgar Square, and we'll be marching in civil resistance against the government, who we believe are committing acts of oblique genocide by these policies of new oil and gas, and we'll continue until they stop them. OK, well, when we look at the energy demands of this country, if we just stopped oil, we'd be back to the dark ages, literally. The lights would go out. Absolutely.
And so, is that what you want? Or you want us just for the lights to go out?
Absolutely not, no.
So what is your plan if you win? Because if we win, we can't run industry, we can't manufacture steel, we can't manufacture concrete, we can't get around. The country would come to a standstill. Victory, to me, looks like we go back to living in caves.
It's a massive question, and I wish we had more time to talk about it. But actually, we have 7 years of oil reserves. We're not talking about cutting off oil and gas overnight. We've got those reserves we can use whilst we transition to renewable energy. And all the science is there. The scientists know we can do this. We've got improvements that we need to make to the grid. We've got onshore the wind that we can bring online. We've got masses of offshore wind and solar energy we can bring online. And it can work. And
what happens when the wind stops, which it often does when we need it most in the winter?
It's a common question, but the science is there, and we know that we can switch to other parts of the UK. There may be some grid improvements that are needed. Get a scientist on to talk about it.
But we can't store wind energy because we don't have batteries capable of, certainly not on the size that we would need. So therefore, we are still dependent on fossil fuels. If we just stop oil, I'll put it to you again, we're going to go back to the dark ages.
No, it's simply not true. We know from the engineers that we've got at the moment that we can use renewable energy. We've got 7 years of, as I say again, we've got 7 years of oil and gas reserves we can continue to use. These new licences that are opening in the North Sea are going to do nothing for our energy security. They're going to do nothing for people's cost of living.
Well, it would make more sense to produce our own gas and oil as opposed to importing it from South America, from Venezuela, from North America, from Australia even, which is what we do at the moment, because we'd surely energy sovereignty would make us less vulnerable to tyrants like Vladimir Putin,
it's so
for example.
Frustrating, isn't it? Because the trouble is, once these licences are given out to the likes of Equinor or BP, we don't own that oil and gas anymore. It's on the open market, and they will sell it to the highest bidder, which probably won't be us when it comes round to it. However, what an opportunity we've got for the renewable energy that we can invest in now. The government spends $236 million on subsidies for the oil and gas industry at the moment. Why not put that into renewable energy?
OK, James, Just Stop Oil put their name today to a report in The Guardian claiming that the richest 1% of the wealthy are super polluters. Who funds Just Stop Oil?
Well, actually, we're funded by ordinary people from around the country. Well, you're more than half our donations now come from ordinary people around the country, like you and me, your neighbours, whoever.
You're funded primarily by the Climate Emergency Fund, aren't you? And that was founded by Aileen Getty, the granddaughter of John Paul Getty, whose petrochemical empire made him the world's richest man.
Well, I'm not sure what your point is.
Well, you're funded by oil money.
If his granddaughter wants to fund a movement that is set up to stop new oil and gas, then great. And it helps these young people that are out on the streets marching at the moment. As I say, my friend Noah, 18-year-old, he's been working since he was 16. He's currently on remand facing trial for marching in the street, asking for a livable future. Do you think that's right?
I think if we have a law and it's breached repeatedly, for example, we saw on Waterloo Bridge recently, Just Stop Oil blocked an ambulance with its blue lights on. The St Thomas's Hospital is right next to that. It's the hospital where my child has been. How do you feel if a child on the way to that hospital died as a direct consequence of the fact that your mob are blocking the bridge?
Disruption of any sort is an awful step to take. And anyone that's either disrupted or suffers any kind of injury as a result of our marches, it's a terrible thing to happen. But we know civil resistance works.
I wonder if it does. One of your other founders, Trevor Nielsen, he stepped away from the Climate Emergency Fund, the primary funder of Just Stop Oil, which is primarily funded on oil money, by saying it's become disruption for the sake of disruption. Working people that are trying to get to their job, get their kids dropped off at school, survive a brutal cost of living crisis in the UK. There's a certain hierarchy that they are doing. It's just performative. It's not accomplishing anything. That's one of your founders.
Yeah, and funders, I should say. They come and go, but as I say, the public generally fund most of our donations at the moment. However, let's just look at what happened in the Netherlands recently, where people, ordinary people from Extinction Rebellion blocked the A12 main road during the month of September, and the police turned around and said, we can't deal with this government, you need to negotiate. And as a result, the Dutch government has voted to phase out oil and gas subsidies, which is massive news, and that's civil resistance in action, and that's what can happen here if you get out on the streets 12 o'clock, Trafalgar Square every day. Please come and join us. OK, James Harvey, you put your case forward, company. Well done, mate. Thank you very much.
Good stuff. OK, let's move on. Meanwhile, there are real fears that pro-Palestinian protests may turn increasingly violent in the days ahead. It comes after a weekend of direct action and follows other protests which targeted the officers of MPs who voted against calls for a ceasefire in Gaza. At the same time, negotiations to release some of the 240 hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza are said to be entering a critical phase. It's thought now that up to 50 hostages could be released in return for a 5-day ceasefire. Well, for the latest on this, I'm joined in the studio by our security editor, Mark White. Mark, can we start with Thomas Hand, who's the father of Emily, believed to be 9 now, who he originally thought his daughter was dead. He gave a press conference today at the Israeli embassy in Kensington. Incredibly moving scenes. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, not just him, quite a number of family members of those being held by Hamas in Gaza gave that news conference, just trying to keep alive the thought that these people are still being held, and also the determination to try to get them back. Now, of course, it comes against the latest reports that suggest that there are late-stage negotiations which might lead to 50-odd hostages being released. All I will say on this is we've been here multiple times before with reports that we're very close to groups of hostages being released. Since the 7th of October, since the attacks, only 4 hostages have been released. 2 Americans in the days after, and then 2 Israelis a week or so after that. And that's it, apart from 1 IDF female soldier who was rescued by her colleagues. And this is what they said, some of the families at that news conference, just talking about all of these false dawns, hopes that there could be a breakthrough and family members released, only to be dashed. This is what they told the news conference.
Every story you bring with another deal here for releasing hostages and another deal there, 50 here, 80 there, 15, 12, there are lots of numbers all everywhere. All this publishing is stabbing our stomachs again.
If you all have families and kids, just imagine one day one of them's gone. Just gone. You don't know where she is. You don't know what suffering she's going, whether she's been fed, watered. But not only that, just the sheer terror of a 9-year-old girl down in those dark tunnels, never seeing the light of day.
It's every parent's worst nightmare. He talks about the prospect of his 9-year-old being held in those tunnels now, and that's where the next stage of this operation is moving towards, isn't it, Mark? If these hostages are in those tunnels, how are they going to get them out of there?
It's going to be extremely difficult because you know, they're not just a few miles of tunnels, there are hundreds of miles of tunnels that stretch from the north right down to the south of the Gaza Strip, right across into Egypt, into the Sinai Peninsula as well. So some real concerns about how on earth effectively you get into these tunnels and try to safeguard the release of the hostages. Interestingly, there's been a lot of condemnation of what the Israeli military are doing in hospitals across Gaza, hospitals which the Israeli military are convinced have been used as bases for Hamas militants, Hamas terrorists over the years. And Al-Shifa Hospital is the latest where there is now this operation underway. They have released video that shows they're down in the tunnel complexes in the grounds of this hospital. Now, they took their drones that went into the tunnel about 20, 30 metres into that tunnel, came across what was a blast door. They didn't go any further for fear of booby traps, but they will have to get down and into it. And they're continuing to look for more tunnel systems underneath what is a vast hospital complex. Martin, they've also released images from the hotel's own security system cameras that show what the IDF claim are hostages on the 7th of October, the day of those deadly attacks, being brought to the Al-Shifa hospital with a view to being put down into the tunnel system there. And these pictures that we can show you now, you see one man, if you're listening on radio, it's one man being bundled into the hospital entrance there, and then it's taken from another angle as they go through a door, another man on a stretcher who's injured, and that same person you saw being bundled also to the left of frame there, being taken in, surrounded by a group of men, one of them with an assault rifle, or at least a couple of them with an assault rifle, in full view of medical staff wearing their scrubs there, which really, as far as the IDF is concerned, illustrates the point they've been making, that medical staff at that hospital are fully aware that Hamas have been operating in and around the hospital for a long time. But they, of course, say very publicly they have no knowledge of this terrorist group in and around their hospital.
Mark White, thank you for that latest update. It's going to be a brutal inch-by-inch next stage of this. OK. Well, still to come, could there be an amnesty for migrants who come to the UK illegally? It's reported that the government is considering offering work visas for thousands of them to stay in Britain. You couldn't make it up. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, and this is Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:25. You're watching or listening to me, Martin Daubney, on GB News. Now, as the government's Rwanda plan seems stuck in deadlock once again, it seems some in government are willing to cave in. Yes, it's being reported that the government could issue thousands of work visas to clear the backlog, or as some others call it, an amnesty for those who have crossed the channel illegally. Now, this is something that I think would rightly get a lot of shekels raised out there. What it comes down to is this. They can't issue enough visas to get them out. They can't deport them because, of course, the Supreme Court has ruled the Rwanda plan illegal. Plan B, as Rishi calls it, will probably be hamstrung in exactly the same way as Plan A, and that is it will face legal challenge, first of all, in the House of Lords. Kate Hoey on this show last week told me right here in the studio that the House of Lords is a house of Remainers, and they'll be doing all they can to derail Rwanda. Next, it will go once again to the High Court and then the Supreme Court. And don't rule out Strasbourg, poking their nose in. And then it'll be the European Court of Human Rights. Meanwhile, they can't seem to agree within central government at all. James Cleverly apparently is not so keen on leaving the ECHR, and that man David Cameron, well, I think we know where he stands on this. He cried off the day after losing the Brexit referendum, and now he's back. There's a great feeling that a Remainer blob is taking over once again, and central to this is the failed Rwanda plan. Now, we're going to be joined now to talk about this is Dr. Mike Jones, Executive Editor of Migration Watch. Good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Jones. Two things we're going to talk about. First, we're going to talk about Rwanda, and then we're looking ahead to the net migration figures due later this week. But first, can we talk about this amnesty of illegals? Can you talk us through what's happening this time?
Well, obviously, any proposed amnesty is going to be completely counterproductive to the aims of the government. It's going to completely conflict with the views of the British public. It's going to contradict the Conservative Party's manifesto. It will increase the pull factor. It will send a very negative signal in terms of the rule of law and the administration of the immigration system. Simply, this can't do.
And Mike, we saw last week 100,000 work visas being granted because asylum seeker claims couldn't be processed quick enough. And here we go again, yet more. A lot of these people could have come to the country illegally, and because they can't be processed out, they're being given the right to work. This is a people smuggler's charter, isn't it?
Essentially, yes. It's creating perverse incentives. And,
that's the Immigration Minister.
Apologies. Essentially, you have issues in the Home Office to do with productivity, the processing of asylum claims. There's a lack of capacity there. But ultimately, this all comes down to the legal architecture that exists in the UK and the fact that there are laws, both transnational and domestic, that prevent governments from detaining and deporting people. And this is imposing a huge burden on the taxpayer, and it's imposing a huge burden on infrastructure and social cohesion.
OK, Mike, we're expecting the net migration figures later this week. Last year it was net 606,000. That's a couple of Birminghams just chucked into Britain. Are we expecting less this time? I've heard in the region of about 500,000. Is your intel along those lines?
My gut instinct is the net migration figures will come down slightly. Simply because the number of people coming on the BNO visa go down, the number of Ukrainians migrating from Ukraine to the UK will decrease. But there are other visas that will show an increase in numbers. So I'm expecting the overall figures to come down, but not by a huge amount.
And Mike, there's one thing they've put in place they say will stop this, and that is the skilled worker visa. They're going to put the salary cap up from 26,000 to 30,000. Do you think that will have any impact whatsoever?
It'll have some impact on the margins, but ultimately you need to cap the skilled worker visa rather than sort of tinkering about with the criteria for the points-based system. You need an upper number there that the Home Office is going to abide to, but ultimately we've seen the skilled worker visa debased, the skill qualifications for that has been reduced, and it's being used as a Trojan horse for low and medium skilled workers, and that's not what it was designed for.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. OK, thank you, Dr. Mike Jones, Executive Director of Migration Watch. Thanks for joining us on the show. Well, there's lots more yet to come between now and 4 p.m. We'll be hearing from the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt soon. He's due to give a speech to Britain's top bosses. Will he reveal anything about his planned tax break, which are due this week? That's all coming up. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
It's 3:31. Good afternoon, Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister's promised to cut taxes carefully and sustainably. Rishi Sunak says the government can move into the next phase of fixing the economy now inflation's been halved. Speaking ahead of Wednesday's autumn statement, he identified 5 long-term goals, which include reducing debt, building sustainable energy, supporting business and delivering world-class education. The government's former chief scientific advisers heavily criticised Boris Johnson, telling the COVID inquiry he's not convinced there was an effective operational response to limit the spread of the virus. Sir Patrick Vallance also described the scale of test and trace facilities as inadequate and said the urgency of action across Whitehall wasn't as consistent or as reliable as it should have been. 4 men have been convicted of murdering Ashley Dale, who was shot with a machine gun in Liverpool last year. The 28-year-old was killed when gunman James Witham forced open the door of her home and opened fire. Joseph Pearce, Niall Barry and Sean Jice were also found guilty of murder. And 15 Just Stop Oil activists have been arrested following a slow march through central London. The group says it's stepping up its demonstrations, demanding an end to new gas and oil licences. Dozens of protesters walked from Trafalgar Square to Whitehall on what they warned was the first of 7 days of action. The Met Police says the area was cleared quickly. The Foreign Secretary's formally been introduced to the House of Lords. The former Prime Minister now holds the title of Baron Cameron of Chipping Norton. Lord Cameron wore traditional scarlet robes for the ceremony, where he wore the oath of allegiance to the King. And you can get more on all of our stories on our website. That's gbnews.com. More news at the top of the next hour.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
All right, let's just get you up to date then with the latest finance here on GB News. And I can tell you that the pound will buy you $1.2482. It'll buy you €1.1419. The price of gold is £1,578.66 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is currently trading at 7,498 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And thank you, Aaron. Now, stick with us because in the next few minutes, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is due to speak and we'll be crossing live to hear of a hint of a tax break. Stick around.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's on your teeth.
It's on your teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:38. You're watching or listening to me, Martin Daubney, on GB News. Now, we're expecting Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to deliver his speech to the Confederation of British Industry. The conference is looking at what benefits British businesses in the countdown to the next general election, and ahead of Wednesday's autumn statement, we might be getting a sniff of a tax cut. Well, Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor, joins me now with On the Money. So, Liam, we're going to cut over to Jeremy Hunt soon. Much talk about a tax cut. They've got to do it, haven't they? If they don't do it, I mean, they're already facing defeat down the barrel of a gun. If they don't give us a tax cut, they're brown bread, aren't they?
That's dead for people that aren't from certain parts of London. Cockney rhyming slang there on national television. We need a lot more of that, don't we, Martin?
We do.
Look, the government in the last 24, 48, 72 hours, they've done what journalists call a complete reverse ferret. We've gone from the idea we couldn't possibly have tax cuts, old boy, because they'd be deeply irresponsible and they'd drive inflation, through to now is the time for growth, now is the time for tax cuts. It's partly because the inflation number last week was better than expected. We went from 6.7% inflation in September to 4.6% in October. That's a big reduction. So the government's telling itself it can now do tax cuts, but they won't juice up the economy too much. It won't be too inflationary. So across the Sunday papers, there are all kinds of anonymous briefings, kite flying, as we call it. You put something up in the air, see if it gets shot down. If it doesn't, you say, that's a great idea. If it does, you say, oh, we never intended to do it anyway. You know what these journalists are like. We've all been there. So over the weekend, there was lots of briefing going on from people in the dark that there are tax cuts coming, and maybe not just business tax cuts, which is what I was saying to you last week. If there are tax cuts, it will be business. Things like the business tax cuts we may get include extending full expensing. What does that mean? It means that earlier this year, Jeremy Hunt, Chancellor, introduced this idea that if a business invests in certain types of capital equipment, plant, factory stuff, and so on, it can offset the expense of that investment against its corporation tax. Happy days. But that's great if you're a big business, if you've got deep pockets, you can raise finance. Not so much if you're a small business, because you're still paying a much higher rate of corporation tax than you were this time last year. It went up from 19 to 25%. We could see cuts to what we call business rates, another business tax. That's the kind of rental income, a tax on the value of a retail premises or a business premises, whether you own it or rent it. Businesses pay that whether they make any money or not, Martin. They pay that whether or not they've even taken any revenue. It's just a dead weight cost. But now, in recent hours even, we're hearing from the Prime Minister that there may be some personal tax cuts. I don't think they're going to cut the headline rate of income tax. I think what they may do is something that I've been calling for a long time, is to unfreeze the personal tax thresholds. So, you know, the level at which you start paying the top rate of tax, the additional rate of tax, the basic rate of tax, they've been frozen now, and they're going to be frozen until 2028 under current plans, which means more and more people get dragged into higher tax brackets. You've now got, you know, middle-ranking teachers, middle-ranking nurses, middle-ranking police officers paying, you know, the top rate of income tax. That was never meant to happen. And something in particular I think should happen is we should raise the starting rate of tax. That starting rate of tax, Martin, is £12,570. That means until you earn 12.5 grand a year, you don't pay any tax, which kind of makes sense, because 12 grand a year is like a third of the average wage, right? It's not much money. That'd be a little part-time job or maybe a lower paid job that's 2 or 3 days a week. But if you take people out of tax all the way up from 12.5 grand to 20 grand, so you don't start paying tax until £20,000, which is a much more kind of substantive wage, you then don't pay people who are earning less than 20 grand those in-work benefits to top up their incomes, less admin, less hassle, and you make it easier to go back to work. You lose less when you go back to work because you get all the money because you're not paying tax up until 20 grand.
Now, there's two things that they've both been saying, Rishi and Jeremy, and that is it would fuel inflation if we do all of this, and secondly, where's the money going to come from? Now, there's rumours, 20 billion quid that Jeremy Hunt seems to have found down the back of the sofa. Was that from a benefits index-linked freeze or something like that?
No.
But this have cost money. Where's it going to come from?
So I often think that the debate about fiscal policy, and we do this so much in the UK, it's really disingenuous. It's not that he's found extra money, right? It's that certain forecasters have said he's not going to borrow as much as we thought he was going to borrow next year. Or, you know, there may be a bit more growth next year and that should generate a bit more tax revenue. So this money is all kind of putative. It's all pretend. It's all, it may happen or it may not happen. So money that we don't even know is there, money which is about us borrowing less than we thought we were going to borrow, but we're still going to borrow, suddenly that's money he can spend. But it's still money he's going to borrow, and he hasn't even got it yet. Do you see what I mean? So we're at third degrees of separation here. It's all mad, really, to say, oh, suddenly he's found all this money. But this is how politics works. It's so ridiculous. Now you've got a lot of people on the right of the Tory party saying, you see, you've got money, you have to spend it, you have to spend it on tax cuts. But someone like me would say, yeah, but if you do tax cuts properly, quite quickly, they don't actually cost money, they make money for the exchequer. If you do a tax cut that generates growth, more spending, less unemployment, less benefit payments, if there's a tax break on investment or something that creates businesses, that will actually be not just fiscally neutral, it won't cost you money, it could be fiscally advantageous, it will make you money. But it always takes a little bit of time. And in that little bit of time, when the tax cut kicks in and has its what we call behavioural effect, the government's got to borrow, right? And borrowing is already very, very high. That's the danger.
Liam, we're still waiting to cut Jeremy Hunt at the Confederation of British Industry. I understand you have a graphic you could show us.
Sure, let's do that. Let's go through the kind of menu of possible tax cuts that are knocking about at the moment in the ether. Extend full expensing, I mentioned that, Martin. This is the ultimate kind of business tax break. Full extended expensing means that companies can offset any investment they do in new factory equipment, in new technology, against their corporation tax bill. So that it's almost as if they're being paid to invest, and they're being paid the full expense of the investment.
That seems common sense.
This came in for 3 years earlier this year, but it's proving popular. It was meant to offset the fact that corporation tax was going up from 19 to 25%, and there are calls, and that the Chancellor will be getting his ear bent at the CBI to extend full expensing to make it permanent or semi-permanent, certainly beyond 3 years. The trouble is, Martin, small firms, they can't afford the finance up front to do the investment, right? So they haven't got deep pockets. They just pay the higher corporation tax. The next one that we've got, apart from full expensing, is cuts to inheritance tax. My paper, the Daily Telegraph, is campaigning for this. Inheritance tax, it's 40% above 325 grand, but you can add up the 325 grand if you're, you know, with your spouse, your wife, your civil partner, and so on, and you get up to 500 grand if you're leaving a house to kids or grandkids. So the threshold's basically $1 million for a married couple, which is a lot, which means, you know, the vast majority of households don't pay inheritance tax. And I actually think it would be a mistake to cut inheritance tax when there's a cost of living crisis, because it is basically, don't attack me too much, but it's broadly speaking a more wealthy person's tax, and these are rather tough times. And the next sort of tax measure that we may actually see is raising frozen tax thresholds. I spoke to you about this. The starting rate of tax, the tax threshold around 20 grand when you start paying the basic rate of income tax, the upper rate of tax, the additional rate of tax. They've been frozen for a while now. They're due to be frozen until 2028. That's bringing millions more people into tax before they're not paying tax, and it's a stealth tax, and it's raising billions of pounds a year, even though headline tax rates have stayed where they are. A lot of Tory backbenchers absolutely hate those frozen tax thresholds. They view them as very unconservative. But perhaps the ultimate threshold you could unfreeze is the personal tax allowance, what we call the starting rate of tax, Martin. That's 12.5 grand, £12,570 a year. If you earn up to that money, you don't pay any tax at all on the year. If you earn above that, you start paying tax. I say, lots of other economists say, from left and right, scrap that, 20 grand, you don't pay any tax up to 20 grand. That means you don't need in-work benefits up to 20 grand. It's less hassle. And it also means there's more incentive to go back to work, because you keep a lot more of your money if you go back to work at a lower income job. And we know there are many, many, with huge respect, lower income workers who haven't gone back to work since COVID, because they make more money from benefits. We need to try and get rid of that benefits trap that discourages people from going back to work.
OK, Liam Maggan, thank you. Always on the money. Thank you very much. We're still waiting for Jeremy Hunt. Are we crossing lines, Jeremy Hunt? Yeah, we're going to move on. He's not up yet, so we're going to swiftly move on to somebody who you would definitely want to hear about. GB News' own Nigel Farage started his jungle journey last night. As I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here returned to our screens. Well, Sophie Reaper reports on all of the action from last night.
It is back. Returning for its 23rd season, ITV's I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here is officially back on our screens. Geordie duo Ant and Dec have returned once again, and as usual, we're enjoying the celebrities suffering a little too much.
I thought it's been the easy bit.
Last night's episode saw 10 celebrities begin their journey down under, with rumours swirling about 2 potential late arrivals. But who do the British public think will clinch the title of this year's Jungle King or Queen?
I'm rooting for Josie Gibson because I love watching her on This Morning. I think she's really bubbly and a load of fun, and I think she'll be brilliant at the trials.
Sam Thompson, because I think he's absolutely hilarious.
Frankie Tesora, he's just an icon, isn't he?
Danielle Harold, because of the performance that she done in EastEnders, so I think she's going to get a lot of support from people for that.
Nella Rose, because she's absolutely fantastic.
Nigel Farage, because he's a lunatic. He's just crazy, isn't he? I just love him. He hasn't got a clue what he's doing half the time, but he's a fantastic character, and it's what the jungle needs this year.
One of our very own, Nigel Farage, has already faced his first bush tucker trial.
Oh, they're horrible, aren't they?
Well prepared for life in the jungle, he told GB News that he's ready to push his boundaries and take a risk.
I've lived on news, numbers, information. To go away from all of that for several weeks is one really big challenge. To confront things that are obviously frightening, but have to deal with them and come through them, is a really good challenge.
Confident as he may be, though, the challenges have only just begun. And for Nigel and the rest of his campmates, there's still a long way to go before one of them is crowned this year's winner. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Cracking stuff. He's already causing a rumble in the jungle. Well, Ant and Dec were ridiculing GB News viewers last night as Keiths and Lindas. We've got one of them now. Not a Keith, but it's Philip Hoy from Hertfordshire. Thanks for joining us on the show. So you must be enjoying the fact that once again Nigel is causing an absolute stink down under.
I've always played with Nigel causing a stink. I have to be honest with you, when this all started, I thought this was a really, really bad idea. Until this morning. And in fact, it was on GB News this morning when somebody said something which really struck a chord. I thought Nigel would look ridiculous, but he's doing it, and he will go to a younger. I mean, people like me who've known Nigel, respected Nigel for many years. I've always been a supporter of him. But of course, there's a lot of young people, and I hadn't appreciated that they had no idea who he is. So he's now going to reach a much younger audience. And that can only be a good thing.
And we're just seeing pictures on screen now, Philip, of a sneak preview of tonight's bush tucker trial. There's Nigel chowing down on udders and teats on a pizza. And it didn't go down entirely well, but I think he's going to just get it down him, crack on, and wash it down with Remainer tears.
Absolutely, and that's what we want. And I keep wondering when he gets back from the jungle, because of course I believe he knows nothing about what's been going on. He knows nothing about camera and all the rest of it. I'd love to know what his first reaction is going to be.
Do you think, like a few people have been saying, actually, there's a political storm going on in Britain. Captain Farage might be better back in Blighty, kind of directing operations from here. Instead, he's down under. Do you still think, Phil, that this is the right thing for him to have done?
I do now. I did, as I say, until this morning. If you'd have asked me yesterday, I'd have said no, completely wrong. But as of this morning, I can see the point behind it. Nigel's a very clever guy, and he's obviously worked out that this gives him a much, much bigger audience, one that he wouldn't normally appeal to. I was really surprised when somebody said, well, they've never heard of Nigel Farage. I can't believe that, but hey, there you go. But no, I think he's right. He's down there for a few weeks, and when he gets back, the mess will still be swirling around, and maybe they'll see that he's the salvation we need.
OK, Philip, it's great to talk to you. I'm afraid we have to leave it right there because now I think we are crossing to Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, live at the Confederation of British Industry. Here he is.
So thank you, Brian.
And thank you so much, Chancellor, for joining us today. It's really great to have you with us to talk about the UK economy, particularly in this week ahead of the autumn statement. A very, very busy week for you. And of course, following the PM speech this morning. So I'll ask you a few questions before we turn to our audience. So look, I can imagine one of the best parts about your role is you travel the world going to G7 summits, talking to other leaders around the world. And in your experience, when you're talking to them and sort of almost making that pitch for why invest in the UK, what do you sort of think is most important for how we attract business investment into the UK economy?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, Rain. Good afternoon, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I've had my head down all weekend writing the autumn statement on Wednesday, but it's not yet finalised. So there's still time for that last-minute idea that if you want to put it into my head, I'm sure you've got a few. Look, I feel a lot more positive about the UK economy than I did a year ago when I came in. And, you know, the biggest reason is because we've managed to halve inflation, but, you know, 11.1% inflation, which it was this time last year, that is, you know, terrifyingly high. And we had to do some very difficult things to get it back under control. But I hope now people can see we're making progress on that. I'll be focusing on growth, which is why it's been very useful to engage with you. We can start to shake off some of the defeatism and pessimism about the UK economy. So what do I say when I'm talking to people overseas about the UK? Well, I say, what are the industries that are going to grow the fastest in the 21st century? I say those are the sectors that the UK is the strongest. So I don't think many people appreciate just how successful our tech industry is, becoming the third largest in the world last year after the United States and China. Life science, advanced manufacturing, clean energy, creative industries, all areas of tremendous success, on top of areas where we've been successful for many years, like financial services. And I think, you know, last year, if I throw my mind back to that very challenging autumn statement, I took the risk of saying, look, I want us to be the world's next Silicon Valley. And I was expecting quite a lot of ridicule when I said that. But I think people understand what we've got in this country that gives us a chance of doing that is we've got outside America the world's best universities, and outside America the world's best financial services. And that gives us something special. So I think we are very well poised as a country in the areas that we would want to be strong in, and we've now got to go for it.
Absolutely, and look, we're not short of ideas. You'll have already seen our 30-page autumn statement submission with, you know, packed full of ideas, I think, from our members. But maybe just building on that a bit, what you just set out there in terms of that pitch for the UK economy. I think at the Conservative Party conference at Business Day, you talked quite compellingly about, you know, the UK being a good place to start a business, but one of the challenges, you know, particularly is when we compare ourselves to the US, is how do we ensure it is a great place to scale up businesses in every region of the UK? Because as you say, we have, you know, we're really lucky in the UK to have world-leading universities in every region of the UK. But we really need to think about how we get that innovation ecosystem working in all regions and that scale up. What would you see as how we do that?
Well, I think if we want to be the world's next Silicon Valley, then we've got to crack scale up. Compared to a decade ago, I think most people would say if you've got a good idea in one of those growing sectors, it's not difficult to find up to 5 million to kind of get your business off the ground. That used not to be the case, but I think that has changed because of EIS, SEIS, VCTs and so on. But if you're trying to get a business from 20 million to, say, 500 million cap, it's still too hard, and you're more likely to get investment from a Canadian pension fund than a British pension fund. And I do think that we've got the second biggest pension fund ecosystem in the world. But for various historic reasons, there are too many barriers that prevent them investing in some of the biggest domestic opportunities. So the Mansion House Pension Fund reforms are designed to address that. I will explain in the autumn statement how we're going to conclude that process. But I also think there are lots of other things that we can do in terms of removing supply-side barriers to growth. But the exam question is, Demis Hassabis, the greatest British tech entrepreneur you've never heard of, an absolutely brilliant guy. What would it take to persuade the Demis Hassabis of the future not to sell out his DeepMind to Google, but actually to grow it into a multi-billion-pound company floated on the London stock market, able to access all the capital he needs? Now, I think we can do that, but we've got to do the work to get there.
Yeah, and look, I think it was good to see, a couple of weeks ago around the AI summit that UK seeking to try and lead some of the development of that regulation. But look, as we think back, and I think we've talked about some of the areas where the UK can really lead the world, but we have to face into some of the challenges. So, and obviously as a chief economist, once a chief economist, and never quite leaves you. But productivity growth in the UK has flatlined since 2008. And there's a danger we're stuck in this dismal decade for living standards in the UK. And I think one of the messages we've been trying to say as we look forward is we need next year not to be a lost opportunity for growth here in the UK. So why do you think as a country and business community we haven't made more progress on really driving productivity growth?
Well, here's a fascinating thing. I mean, our productivity is 15% lower than Germany's. So broadly speaking, it takes Germans 4 days to make something. It takes us 5 days. We need to address that. But despite that handicap of a lower productivity, we've actually grown faster than Germany since 2010. Why is that? Well, I think the reason is because we out-innovate Germany. They have higher productivity, but we have our innovation industries that have done incredibly well. That is the period in which we built this huge technology industry that we didn't have before. So the way I look at that is I say, well, if we could fix the productivity, we'd be absolutely unstoppable because we've got the innovation as well. And why do we have that productivity gap? Well, it's not because Germans work harder than us. If anything, we work longer hours than them. It is because of issues around skills, where our universities sector is stronger than Germany's, but for the 50% of school leavers who don't go to university, the Germans have a better system of technical education, and we need to learn from that. And part of that is what Rishi Sunak is talking about in terms of people doing maths and English to 18, because we need to improve our basic skills. But part of that is that we have less capital investment as a proportion of our GDP. Germany, France, and the United States, between them, average about 2% more invested in GDP every year. So what you will see on Wednesday, without going into individual measures, is a whole range of measures designed to unlock business investment and close that gap with countries like France, Germany, and the United States. And one of those I talked about yesterday, which is making it easier for people to get planning approved. We're going to completely overhaul the planning system. We're going to say local authorities have to meet statutory deadlines, or they give you guys your money back and then have to process the application free of charge. We've got to unlock access to the grids as well. So a lot of supply side measures to boost that investment.
Look, and I think it's great to hear business investment being front and centre of that. And obviously, we're hoping to see full expensing made permanent as part of setting out a more permanent landscape around that. But I think touching on that, the sort of energy transition and that move to a greener economy, when we look to some of what's happening around the world, we see in the US, Biden and IRA and the Inflation Reduction Act, and obviously the EU have their Green New Deal. What do you think the UK really needs to do to make sure that we secure that green growth market, so something we think is really important at the CBI?
Well, first of all, we should recognise we've done really well in that sector. I mean, over the last decade, we built the third largest renewable sector in Europe after Germany and Norway. We're by far Europe's largest producer of offshore wind energy. And that's why we've identified clean energy as one of our 5 strategic industries that we absolutely know we have to back. I mean, very simple reason, we have to double the amount of electricity that we generate by 2050. So we're going to have to do a lot of work in this area, and we want to capitalize on the economic opportunity. We don't believe the way to do this is to engage in a subsidy race with either the EU or the United States, because we actually think the market-based mechanisms, which I suppose are a form of subsidy, but they're a market-based form of subsidy, like contracts for difference, are less distorting and more effective. And even after IRA, we will, if you take all of those different ways of supporting the clean energy industry, we're investing a greater proportion of our GDP in support for clean energy than the United States are. We do recognise, however, the need for targeted interventions, and that's why we announced the £960 million fund on Friday, which is essentially designed to make sure that where there's a targeted intervention necessary in the sectors of the clean energy industry where we've decided we want to be a global leader, whether it's hydrogen or CCUS or offshore wind, then we have the firepower to do that. But in the end, it is going to be about innovation and creativity and ingenuity and enterprise as much as support from the state that's going to make the difference to our success in these areas.
Well, in a moment, I will open up to some of that ingenuity from business leaders in the room. But just a final question, if I may. Obviously, it's the autumn statement week. I can't imagine how busy it is for you. Just take us a little bit behind the scenes on Autumn Statement Day. What will be for breakfast? And also, how do you think the business voice helps you manage some of the pressures you must face in that sort of run-up to fiscal events?
Sorry, was that last question? How can you help me manage the pressure?
Well, you know, I suppose just how the business voice, I think, can really, you know, well, alongside for me, it's always porridge for breakfast of champions, but I appreciate other breakfasts are available.
Well, if you want the gory details, you know, it will be porridge, banana, honey, egg on toast.
Great.
So that's the little secret. But let me talk about the business voice. First of all, I have really valued the interactions that I've had with you and the CBI and indeed many of the people in this room, and we're very grateful for that. This is a moment when, having made progress on inflation, we want to focus on the long-term growth of the British economy. You are all business people. You understand that Rome wasn't built in a day. We're not going to get there immediately. I won't be able to do every single thing on the list that you've asked me to do. But I hope you will look at Wednesday's measures and apply to those measures the same definitions of success as you would apply to your own businesses. And that is to say, what matters is not the headlines you grab on the next day, but are these the measures that are going to make a real difference in the next 5 years? And I think that we have to recognise, if we're going to catch up with German levels of productivity, if we're going to back our scale-ups so that they're like Silicon Valley and they can access capital as easily as that, if we're going to unlock the incredible potential that I really do believe we have, this is a 5 or 10 year project. But for me, the inspiration, I always think the Chancellor that inspired me the most is the person who sadly died this year, Lord Lawson. But what Nigel Lawson did, amongst many things, was through Big Bang, he left this country with the City of London. And it wasn't in his lifetime, it wasn't while he was Chancellor, but that legacy, the taxes generated by our financial services sector, pays for half the cost of running the NHS. Now, if we can do the right things on Wednesday so that we unlock that potential for 5 or 10 years' time. I think we can do something really amazing for the future of this country, and that's what I want to do.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chancellor. I will now open up to...
OK, you just heard there the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt speaking at the Confederation of British Industry. I'm still joined here in the studio by Liam Halligan, GB News' economics editor. What do you make of that? A rather bizarre branch out into what he was having for breakfast. I felt that felt a bit... The tone didn't feel right. People are struggling. People are looking for a tax break. They want to know if any good news is coming down the line. What were your main takeaways from Jeremy Hunt's speech?
Yeah, without wishing to be chippy, the same thing jumped out at me, Martin. This is two extremely wealthy people. Do they understand what life's like, you know, outside the M25? Maybe not. It was all a bit chummy. The CBI, of course, is on life support. It may not survive. Yeah. It's been, you know, it's been dealing with the huge sort of sexual misconduct scandal. Obviously, the people involved deny wrongdoing, but this was very much a kind of coming out for the CBI, having the Chancellor there, the first time they've managed to stage a proper event for many months. So what did the Chancellor say? He said, I feel a lot more optimistic about the economy than this time last year. Well, I should hope so, Martin, because this time last year inflation was 11.1% and now it's 4.6%. But I do think there's a bit of a spring in Jeremy Hunt's step. I do think instinctively he's wanted to cut taxes. He now seems to have the clearance from number 10 to do that. That's partly because inflation is down. It came down to 4.6% during the year to October, 6.7% during the year to September. So that's a big reduction. It's still not licked. The inflation target we should be at is 2%. But it's partly because inflation's down. He feels he can now implement tax cuts, which may juice up the economy without causing inflation. But another reason why they want to do tax cuts, Jeremy Hunt and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, they are under enormous pressure from the right of their party. You know, dozens of Tory backbenchers. They're looking at the opinion polls. Starmer's 20, 25 points ahead. His Labour Party are saying, you have to cut taxes now. You have to cut taxes now. Other things that Jeremy Hunt just said there to Rain Newton-Smith, who runs the CBI, he says, I want to back our scale-ups. What does that mean? He wants to get pension funds to invest more in burgeoning British businesses, so they aren't funded by Americans or foreign stock exchanges. They don't go abroad. They stay here, and our best startups become our best world-class companies, maybe using money that's in pension funds as what we call venture capital. We want to match Germany's level of productivity, he says. Well, that is referring to full expensing. He wants businesses to invest, and he wants to make it tax efficient for them to invest. But finally, he said, we don't want a subsidies race. He's talking about Joe Biden's what we call IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is basically a massive splurge of $400 billion worth of subsidies to the green industry, the renewable energy lobby. They have very, very powerful lobbyists there on Capitol Hill. We're not going to do that on that scale. We can't compete with subsidies like that here in the UK. But we are going to have what's called the Advanced Manufacturing Plan, a kind of mini version of America's Inflation Reduction Act, a mini pot for subsidising industry. That's something that Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch's been working on. She was very keen to claim credit for it over the weekend. So they're the sort of big three aspects, I think, of this autumn statement. There will be tax cuts, mainly business, but some personal as well. I think there will be full expensing extension to make it easier for businesses to invest. And then there will be that advanced manufacturing plan. But we're going to learn more between now and lunchtime Wednesday, when the statement actually happens.
So, Liam Halligan on the money as ever. Thank you very much. Now we're crossing to our political editor, Christopher Hope, now for the political reaction to that. Chris, so Jeremy saying a lot there. We just talked with Liam about the fact that really this comes down to this. If the Tories don't give us a tax cut, they're toast.
That's right, Jeremy Hunt there, appealing for some patience from business there. He said, give me 5 years to unlock the growth. And I'm not sure they got 5 years, this government. They've got to get something over the line by next year's general election. I can't do everything you want, he said to them, but I hope that you can give me a chance that if you were doing it in your business, you'd understand that. Now, earlier today, we had the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak giving a speech in North London in which he said he contrasted the business experience of Mr Hunt and his own experience as the Prime Minister's experience as a city investor, trader, hedge funder, whatever you describe it, against what Labour's lack of business experience on the front bench. And they're trying to show that you know, it's going well the inflation has halved this year, but nowhere near the 2% target, as Liam says there, that the government has set itself with the Bank of England. But don't wreck it, don't risk it with Labour, is the clear political message. But the line we had earlier from the PM, Mr Sunak, I want to cut tax, I believe in cutting taxes. Well, you know, we can believe in Father Christmas, but it doesn't make it true. So get on with it, is what most, I think, people on the right would say to Rishi Sunak. He's got this autumn statement on Monday. We understand that all the measures are now locked in as of yesterday. How much headroom he's got to spend? Well, it could be low billions, according to the IFS. It could be tens of billions, according to another think tank. We'll wait and see. But I think almost the time for talking has gone, certainly with the small boats last week and now with tax cuts. The Tory right want to see more from this Prime Minister, more from this government to do things that will help pull back that 20-point poll lead for the Labour Party. And I think Wednesday could show us some trying to do that.
OK, Chris, that's tax. That's Jeremy Hunt. Another story that's grabbing the headlines today, this rumours of a cabinet split over Rwanda. What's the latest on that one?
Yeah, well, that's because, not surprisingly, there's some concern in Cabinet about what the government plans to do next. They've lost that Supreme Court unilaterally last week. This week, on Thursday, I think, we'll be seeing details of this treaty the government's going to try and sign up from the Memorandum of Understanding with Rwanda that should reassure judges that anyone sent from the UK who arrives by small boats to Rwanda is not then sent onwards to the country they came from, because, of course, that they have fled there. So that's what the treaty should show. Further to that, next week we're expecting some form of law from the government to show how they're going to try and get around this with the ruling last week from the Supreme Court, to try and show that they can maybe disapply human rights in the cases of people who arrive by small boats. There's viewed here as a full fat approach. That would be almost leaving the ECHR, or a semi-skimmed version, disapplying the rules in some cases. But in the Cabinet, there's concern about that. Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary, is said to be concerned. Vicky Atkins, the Attorney General, even James Cleverly, the new Home Secretary, he's concerned, and that's where the split is. So there's no question Mr Sunak is cross about it. As we spoke about last week, didn't we? I bet him a pint of beer, or tried to, that it wouldn't happen. He gets the anger, Martin, but he's got to try and get round his own cabinet and deliver it and show this control. Again, something else the government talks about, but the time for action is now.
OK, Chris Hope, thank you for that update from Westminster. I think your beer is safe, Chris. OK, moving on now. Our top story this hour, a number of Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested as they took to the streets of central London. Some were handcuffed and put into police vans as they held a slow march in the capital. The environmental group is vowing to march every day from this point until it wins, whatever that means. The campaign will last 7 days until November the 26th, demanding that the government stop all new licences for oil and gas contracts. Well, we can cross now and speak again with GBNews reporter Ray Addison, who's been following events today. So, Ray, finally, it seems the police got tough with Just Stop Oil. No more tea and sympathy, but a bit of action.
Yeah, definitely. Very robust policing this afternoon, Martin, from the Met Police. And police officers here who are patrolling around Parliament Square, where I'm stood now, have told me they've actually beefed up the number of police officers that are around Parliament, just in case there are any straggler activists from Just Stop Oil that they didn't round up earlier on and they start to do any further protests. Have to say, absolutely no sign of that at the moment, although we have been checking whenever we hear those police sirens to see what's going on. Of course, we do know that 15 activists were arrested as they tried to march down Whitehall by Met Police. It was Section 7 of the Public Order Act, interfering with road transport infrastructure. They're complaining, Just Stop Oil, that they were arrested after only 2 minutes of marching, and they're saying, is this what our democracy has become? Of course, you know, they do risk, if they face charges, if any of those activists do get charged, they do then risk the chance of imprisonment. But that, of course, viewers might say is the risk that you take if you choose to use that form of protest. It started at Trafalgar Square. It was the first of 7 days of action, so we've got 6 more to come. Pretty small numbers, 50 activists or so, only 15 arrests. We could see larger numbers as the week continues. Of course, we saw a bit of a circus there as well. We had a YouTuber who decided to kind of follow the group around and take the mickey, and they've ended up on quite a few of Just Stop Oil's actual social media videos as well. Another guy had a ghetto blaster in a shopping trolley with the United Nations flag, and that was pumping out Heal the World by Michael Jackson. Everything was pretty much going on at this protest. Tomorrow, we know that we have the president of South Korea in town. He's coming to meet King Charles. And then on Wednesday, we've got Budget Day. So plenty of opportunities there for Just Stop Oil to actually cause some really major disruption if they time it correctly. Of course, the Met Police, by the looks of today's actions at least, will be on hand to try and stop them.
And Ray Edison, no doubt they'll be beefing that security up to make sure that the South Korean president isn't disrupted. Just great. They didn't do this sooner to stop Londoners and those trying to get to work being disrupted. Do you think a part of this, Ray, part of this, Ray, is the fact that we saw on the last protest at Waterloo Bridge, protesters blocking the route, blocking an ambulance. And, of course, St Thomas's Hospital just over the way there, one of London's biggest hospitals, 6,000 children given birth every year there. The public sympathy because of the risk of life has absolutely evaporated, hasn't it?
Just Stop Oil are very clear. They say that their policy is to move out of the way immediately for ambulances. And I have to say that I have seen them move out of the way of an ambulance. However, that ambulance was still held up. It was still delayed. I saw that with my own eyes. I saw them, as soon as they realised it was there, move out of the way of it. However, if you're in a life and death emergency situation and you're in the back of an ambulance, every single second could count. And therefore, although potentially you might argue it's laudable that they will move out of the way as best they can, they've still caused that risk to whoever is in the back of that ambulance receiving that emergency care. That could be, a man, woman, child, a relative of somebody in the protest. Who knows? Somebody is in there, they're in an emergency situation, and therefore arguably not a lot of sympathy, and understandable, not a lot of sympathy from members of the public when they start doing that kind of action. However, most of the time, of course, it is just members of the public that are being held up. However, they can get very angry as well, get out of their vehicles and remonstrate with Just Stop Oil activists. We didn't see that today, however, because the Met Police were so quick to get in there and make those arrests.
OK, Ray Addison, thanks for that update. At long last, it seems the police are finally just stopping Just Stop Oil. Well, we'll have lots more on that story at 5 o'clock, and there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com, and you've helped to make that the fastest growing national news website in the country, so thanks to all of you. Now, coming up, there are real fears that pro-Palestinian protests may turn increasingly violent in the days ahead. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, and we are Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 4:25. I'm Martin Daubney. Now, some breaking news to bring you. Tel Aviv has come under a huge Hamas rocket attack this afternoon. More than 100 separate alerts sounded right across the city, stretching as far south as Ashdod. For the latest, I'm joined now in the studio by our security editor, Mark White. Mark, what's the latest on this breaking story?
Well, it seems that this is the biggest rocket attack aimed at Tel Aviv since those terrorist attacks on the 7th of October. We've got an image that we can show our television viewers, which is taken from the app that many Israelis have. That app there just gives you an indication. These are all separate alerts right across Tel Aviv, from the north to the south, into the west of Tel Aviv, east of Tel Aviv, I should say, and as far south as the city of Ashdod. This is just in the last 10 minutes, sirens sounding right across Tel Aviv as people ran for the shelters. The Iron Dome missile defence system sprung into action. We don't know as yet whether any of these rockets got through, but a very significant number. And what this shows, Martin, is that all these weeks on, more than a month after these attacks, and after Israel has gone into Gaza in a very significant way, a bombing from the air and now a ground operation, Hamas still has clearly very serious capability there to pop up and to launch these attacks on Tel Aviv.
And a second breaking story you have, Mark. We saw footage earlier of the Hamas being based in the Al-Shifa hospital. We've got a new line on that.
Yes, well, a lot of concern about the Israeli operation into the Al-Shifa hospital, Gaza's largest hospital, claiming that the IDF have no right to be there, and this is an infringement of international laws and international norms. But Israel has claimed throughout that the reason they've gone to that hospital is because Hamas terrorists and other terrorists have been using that hospital as a base of operations. Well, we've been told that Israel have been interrogating 300 Hamas terrorists that have been arrested, detained by them in recent days. And some of those Hamas operatives have told them, yes, indeed, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the other terrorist group, were based in the Al-Shifa hospital, at least 100, often dressed in medical gear to try to blend in. This is what one of those terrorist prisoners told the Israeli interrogators.
I saw a lot of them, about 80, 90, 100. It reached 100 people. Whose people? The terrorists? Hamas terrorists. Hamas and Islamic Jihad. In the hospital, in the Shifa hospital, in the heart of the Shifa hospital. Shifa, not the Al-Quds. Shifa. They were dressed as nursing staff, but they were not nurses or doctors. Hamas operatives, dressed as medical staff in order to blend in within the hospital wards, even in the intensive care unit.
And Mark, this is quite a revelation because one of the most contentious lines throughout this entire conflict, Hamas using human shields, Hamas using hospitals to shield themselves, and now the revelation there appears to be they were actually dressing as doctors, nurses, hospital operatives to give them the direct cover of pretending to work in the hospital, but really they're terrorists. This is an astonishing breakthrough.
Yeah, another video actually showing what the Israeli Defence Forces say are Hamas terrorists dragging hostages into Al-Shifa on the 7th of October after these attacks. In full view of medics, they're wearing their scrubs. This is one of the hostages being manhandled in through the front door of this huge hospital complex. Another angle, then you see another of the hostages, according to the Israelis, on this stretcher there. And you see the medical staff in their scrubs, clearly seeing Hamas terrorists there with their automatic weapons, as these people are being dragged down the corridor. And this, of course, of great concern to the families of the people that are still being held, believed to be in the tunnel complexes underneath Al-Shifa and elsewhere in the Gaza Strip. And we were hearing from some of those families today who've been reacting to this news again coming from Hamas officials suggesting that there might be the release of up to 50 hostages in the coming days. They say they've seen it all before, multiple false dawns, and all it does is really just pile on the agony and the heartache for them. This is what they said a little earlier.
Every story you bring with another deal here for releasing hostages and another deal there, 50 here, 80 there, 15, 12, there are lots of numbers all everywhere. All this publishing is stabbing our stomachs again.
If you all have families and kids, just imagine one day one of them's gone. Just gone. You don't know where she is. You don't know what suffering she's going, whether she's been fed, watered. But not only that, just the sheer terror of a 9-year-old girl down in those dark tunnels, never seeing the light of day.
It's absolutely heartbreaking to listen to the testimony of the families there, and we're told that there are at least 240 hostages. The Israelis actually think it's more than that, but they haven't been able to 100% confirm that some of the people who are missing are actually being held as hostages. And the really distressing thing for the families to wrap their head around is that there are hundreds of miles of these tunnel systems where their families could be. It's going to be a very, very difficult job for the Israeli military to get in there and to rescue them.
Mark White, thank you for that dramatic update. OK, there's still lots more to come between now and 5 o'clock, including Nigel Farage, of course, is down under. We'll be looking ahead to tonight's Bush Tucker trial, in which he has a stomach-churning challenge. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Good afternoon. It's 4:32 here in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has promised to cut taxes carefully and sustainably. Rishi Sunak says the government can move into the next phase of fixing the economy now that inflation's been halved. Speaking ahead of Wednesday's autumn statement, he identified 5 long-term goals, which include reducing debt, building sustainable energy, supporting business and delivering world-class education. The government's former chief scientific advisor has heavily criticised Boris Johnson, telling the COVID inquiry he's not convinced there was an effective operational response to limit the spread of the virus. Sir Patrick Vallance described the former Prime Minister as weak and indecisive in his daily diary entries, adding he was frequently bamboozled by the science. Sir Patrick also said the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, had a habit of saying things that weren't true. 4 men have been convicted of murdering Ashley Dale, who was shot with a machine gun in Liverpool last year. The 28-year-old was killed when James Witham forced open the door of her home and opened fire. Sean Zeiss and Niall Barry were also found guilty after the jury heard they'd organised and encouraged the killing following a fight with the victim's boyfriend at Glastonbury, while Joseph Pearce was identified as a fellow foot soldier. They'll be sentenced on Wednesday. 15 Just Stop Oil activists have been arrested following a slow march through central London. The group says it's stepping up its demonstrations, demanding an end to new gas and oil licences. Dozens of protesters walked from Trafalgar Square to Whitehall on what they warned was the first of 7 days of action. The Met Police says the area was cleared quickly. We'll be back with more in just under half an hour's time, or you can get more right now on our website, gbnews.com.
OK, now, Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds says the UK has hit the highest tax burden in 70 years because of low growth. But Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says Wednesday's autumn statement will go for growth, whilst also addressing business leaders and senior politicians at the Confederation of British Industry conference earlier on. Well, I'm joined again now by Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor. Joins me with On the Money. No sting. Right, so Jeremy Hunt, he laid out his vision for growth, but he hasn't been specific yet about where those cuts are going to be. But you said he's got a spring in his step.
He has got a spring in his step because he seems to have got clearance from Number 10 that he can finally do some tax cuts. I think instinctively Jeremy Hunt is a tax cutter. A lot of people on the right of the Conservative Party will scoff at that because he has overseen a big increase in taxation. You know, the tax burden in the UK is currently at a 70-year high. That's the share of our national income that's accounted for by tax. It's approaching 38, 39%. But when he wanted to be Tory leader, when he was campaigning, Jeremy Hunt said that he wanted to cut the rate of corporation tax from 19% to 15%, all the way down to 12.5%, which is where it is in the Republic of Ireland. So he has got a spring in his step now because Number 10, whether it's because inflation is down, inflation obviously came down sharply in the year to October, down to 4.6% from 6.7% the month before during the year to September. Whether it's because of that Number 10 are saying, oh, we can now afford to do tax cuts because they won't juice up the economy so much that it causes more inflation. Or, as I suspect, panic because the right of the Conservative Party is really angry that Suella Braverman was removed as party leader. There's talk about letters of no confidence going in against Rishi Sunak from some of his own backbenchers. The opinion polls aren't making any better reading for the Tories, 20, 25 points behind Labour on some measures. So I think it's probably using the fact that inflation has come down to justify what we call in journalism a reverse ferret, changing your mind at short notice. But it's not a panic, really. So I do think there will be both business and personal tax cuts in this autumn statement, or at least signals on Wednesday that they're coming.
I've got a graphic for us with some more of that detail on.
Sure, let's have a look at some of the possibilities of the tax cuts that Jeremy Hunt could actually go for. The first is, if we can just get the graphic up, the first is extending full expensing. Full expensing happened, it began in April this year. It allows companies to offset all their approved investments in factory equipment, new technology against their corporation tax bill. Great for big businesses. They've got deep pockets. They can raise money for investment. They've often got a lot of cash on their balance sheets. Small businesses, they won't be able to take much of advantage of that. They'll just end up paying the higher rates of corporation tax, which went from 19 to 25%, a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises. What's next score on the door? What's the next thing that Jeremy Hunt could do? Well, he could, if we can change the graphic now, he could cut inheritance tax. That's something that my paper, the Sunday Telegraph, has been campaigning for. I would caution against that because it's seen, OK, it annoys a lot of people, but very few households actually pay it. The allowances are bigger than people really understand. If you add up a married couple's allowance and you're leaving a family home, The allowance collectively is £1 million, which means most households aren't troubled by corporation tax, even though it does worry them. It's seen as a kind of wealthy person's tax. This is not a time to be doing things for wealthy people. It's more a time to be doing things for the just about managing classes, people who are struggling with this cost of living crisis. And that's why it's also being floated that Jeremy Hunt may unfreeze personal tax allowances. These are the stealthy changes where tax allowances, the amount of money after which you pay income tax, higher rate of income tax, basic rate of income tax, they're frozen, and as inflation and wages go up, more and more people are dragged into higher tax brackets. And the ultimate tax threshold that you could unfreeze is the basic rate, is the starting rate of tax, the personal tax allowance. I've personally been arguing for this in my columns. You start paying income tax, Martin, after £12,570. Now, that's been frozen, that threshold, so more and more people, as wages go up, are being dragged into that tax bracket, including some people getting the basic state pension. That's going to happen over the next year to 18 months, by the way, because that allowance is frozen under current plans until 2028. That is the ultimate stealth tax. So I am saying, a lot of cross-party economists are saying, let's just raise that starting rate of personal tax allowance to 20 grand. So unless you earn 20 grand, which is still well below the average wage, you don't pay any tax at all. Because between 12.5 grand and 20 grand, a lot of people will be paying tax and then getting some of it back in in-work benefits, a lot of hassle. The incentive structure isn't there. People don't want to go back to work because they'll lose a lot of their headline money. And yet we know we've got lots of vacancies. We know we've got lots of people sitting at home who haven't been back to work since lockdown. A lot of people could get those little part-time jobs that really help local economies, that you earn between 12 and 20 grand a year if they're decent jobs. So I would say to Jeremy Hunt, unfreeze the personal tax allowance, put it up to 20 grand, be bold. You'll save money in the end from that because it will generate more activity, less benefit payments. All he needs, a bit of leadership.
Superb, Liam Halligan, as always, bang on the money. Still to come, we're expecting to hear from Lord Cameron in his first major speech as Foreign Secretary. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, and this is Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:44. You're watching or listening to me, Martin Daubney, on GB News. Now, a new survey by YouGov has found that 16% of teachers have admitted to self-censoring in front of religious pupils. The centre-right think tank claims this has created a de facto blasphemy code in schools across the country. It says the Batley Grammar School incident, where a teacher was forced into hiding and received death threats after showing a class a picture of the Prophet Muhammad, has, quotes, clearly scared the teaching profession. Well, joining me now is Toby Young, General Secretary of the Free Speech Union. Toby, thanks for joining us. It's always a pleasure. In this report, the foreword is written by Nadeem Sahawi, saying Batley was a national disgrace. And yet here we are. This report of over 1,100 teachers shows that teachers are quite literally living in fear.
Yeah, that's right, Martin. And the actual headline figures in the report are even worse than your initial introduction implied. So the headline figure is that 55% of teachers in English schools wouldn't show a picture of Muhammad to their classes. And it's partly because they saw what happened to the teacher at Batley Grammar School when he did that. He was immediately targeted by a Muslim outrage mob, denounced in the local mosques. You had crowds of angry Muslims outside the school. He had to go into hiding with his young family. And as far as I know, he still hasn't returned to teaching at that particular school. He didn't get any support from his head teacher, who suspended him pending an investigation. He got no support from the teaching unions, and he got very lukewarm support from the government. So, you know, it's understandable in a way that teachers think, well, if I was to act similarly, the local Muslim community might react in a similar way, and I'd be completely isolated and vulnerable. For teachers that have young families, that's obviously a huge risk.
Yeah, Toby, I can confirm that the teacher is still in hiding with his wife and children. He's not teaching anywhere, never mind the same school. He's too afraid to go back to work. He still daily lives in fear of his life. And so, Toby, it's absolutely no surprise, is it, that teachers across the land are living under that shadow of fear. And it seems, when you read reports like this, Toby, that the mob has won.
It does, Martin. And one thing the Free Speech Union is doing to try and rectify this situation is to persuade the Department of Education to include free speech amongst the British values that schools in England and Wales are expected to promote. At the moment, they're expected to promote mutual respect and tolerance of people with different religions and beliefs. But that's not the same thing as respecting or teaching respect for free speech. And the head teacher of Batley Grammar School, when he justified suspending the religious studies teacher who'd shown his class a picture of the Prophet Muhammad, said that he thought it might be a breach of the British value of teaching mutual respect and tolerance for people with different religions and beliefs, because it was disrespectful to people with Muslim beliefs. So far from protecting free speech, that particular British value, which schools are expected to promote at the moment, was invoked by the head teacher to justify suspending the teacher in question, which is really shocking.
And Toby, another concerning fact that's come out of this policy exchange think tank is that 36% of teachers surveyed admitted they were getting guidance on how to avoid causing offence in their lessons. So teachers are being taught how not to teach in case it offends people.
Yeah, no, it's very disappointing to learn this, Martin. There is no right not to be offended. And if you believe in free speech, that means defending things that some people are going to find offensive. I mean, it would be one thing, Martin, if teachers and schools respected the blasphemy codes of Muslims by not mistreating the Quran, not reproducing pictures of Muhammad in lessons and so forth. But if that's where we're going to go as a country, if we're going to respect the most sacred, precious beliefs of particular minorities, then I think it's reasonable to expect those minorities to respect the most sacred and precious beliefs of the indigenous British population. And we certainly don't see any reciprocation along those lines. We haven't seen that in the last 6 weeks with the protests every Saturday, the pro-Palestinian protests, which often lead to the desecration of British statues and war memorials. We saw that last week with the protest outside Downing Street, some of the protesters climbing all over the memorial to the Royal Artillery. I mean, if Muslim communities want teachers and schools and school children to respect their most sacred beliefs, to honour their blasphemy codes, then it would be, I think, helpful for them to similarly respect our most precious and sacred values too, instead of trampling all over them.
What can be done about this, Toby? I mean, we have a situation now where almost 2.5 years on, a teacher is still living in fear of their lives. We had a situation where a 14-year-old autistic boy damaged the Quran. His mother was dragged in front of what appeared to be a Sharia court, wouldn't press charges because she was too scared. This is continually happening, and yet there seems to be only demands for tolerance in terms of it being a one-way traffic situation.
Well, one thing the Free Speech Union did after the teacher at Batley Grammar School was targeted by a Muslim outrage mob, we wrote to the Charity Commission to complain about the way in which the hostility towards the teacher had been stirred up in the local mosque. And subsequently, I know some other people, including me, but not in my capacity as head of the Free Speech Union, just in a personal capacity, wrote to the Charity Commission to complain about various anti-Semitic sentiments being expressed in mosques, which are registered charities. So one thing you can do, I think, Martin, is you can encourage the Charity Commission to hold the feet to the fire of the faith leaders in mosques preaching this kind of intolerance and hatred. In addition, you could join the Free Speech Union's campaign to try and persuade the Department for Education to ask schools to promote free speech, which they're not doing at the moment, and to promote genuine tolerance for different religions.
Toby, and we have to cut across you there because we now need to cut to David Cameron, who's speaking at the Global Food Security Summit. Let's go to David Cameron live now.
And an apology. I was meant to be teaching a course in Abu Dhabi at New York University in January, and I've had to cancel that because of my new role, but I was very much looking forward to another stay in your remarkable country. And of course, thank you to the Children's Fund Foundation and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for their support. It is so good to be back working with you again on these sorts of issues that matter so much. This government has a proud record on development. I'm proud of what we did on development, and I'm determined that we put development right back at the heart of our Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office. It is so important. Now, you've had a long day with lots of speeches. I've had an extraordinary day going to the House of Lords and doing all the right things and nodding and saying the oath and all the rest of it. So I can go home and tell Mrs. Cameron she's now Lady Cameron. She's absolutely furious about that. But nonetheless, that's what happened to me today. But you've had a long day. You've had lots of speeches. So I just want to make 4 simple points. The first is what you've been doing today and talking about today, food security, really matters. I believe in all of the Sustainable Development Goals. Indeed, I was part of the committee that helped do the original work on drawing them up. They're all important. I care about all of them. But food is foundational to all aspects of development. Without secure access to a nutritious diet, nothing can be achieved. And malnourished children can never fully develop their bodies and their minds, and it robs them of their futures, and it robs their societies of their potential. And the number of people facing acute food insecurity is the highest that it has been in years. And this is just the tip of what I've called a silent crisis, with a third of the world unable to afford a healthy diet. So I promise you this today, the UK will continue to lead efforts like this. Now, it's great to speak after Minister Dias from Brazil as they take on the G20 presidency. As Prime Minister, I hosted with Brazil summits on hunger and nutrition for growth in 2012 and in 2013. Together, we galvanized global action. It was more money invested in better outcomes, and that's what's needed again. Second point, this is an absolutely critical moment, not just because this silent crisis is growing, but because we cannot separate it from other global crises. Putin's illegal invasion brought this home, as he deliberately sought to rob us of one of the world's great breadbaskets. His cynicism was plain for all to see. He obstructed the Black Sea Grain Initiative. He then walked away from it. He then tried to destroy the very supplies that the world needs. But I saw for myself in Ukraine, in the port of Odessa, there is good news. Ukraine is pushing Russia back in the Black Sea, and with the new Unity facility between UK insurance brokers and the government in Kiev, shipping insurance for their food exports is affordable once more. So let the message go out. Ships are sailing, grain is being exported, Ukraine will continue to help feed us all. Third point, there is a vital link between food security and development on the one hand, and the problem of state fragility and conflict on the other. Of course, farmers can farm, traders can trade, but without the rule of law, without property and land rights, without peace, without trusted institutions, you cannot get your product to market. And that's why it is time to change the way we do development. And that is what Andrew Mitchell's excellent white paper published today is all about. It captures how Britain will help to do this in the future. No more top-down targets that set up fragile states to fail, instead working with them.
And that was David Cameron. That is David Cameron speaking at the Global Food Security Summit. The newly crowned Baron Cameron of Chipping Norton. I'm talking about food security matters, the silent crisis of hunger, how Putin robbed the earth of one of its greatest bread baskets. We'll have more on that and plenty of other stories, including Nigel Farage down under, and more on Just Stop Oil right after this. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. We're Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome to the show. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Loads coming up in the next hour, including, is it time to Just Stop? Just Stop Oil at last. Met police nick 15 of their protesters, and watch what happened when I put it to one of their organisers that Just Stop Oil is actually funded by oil money. Next story, the COVID inquiry rumbles on, and once again they're swinging at Boris, this time Sir Patrick Vallance, putting the boot into Bozza. And finally, you will not want to miss this, Richard Tice is joining me in the studio, and he's going to give us a rendition on his didgeridoo. That's ahead tonight of the fact Nigel is facing the first Bush Tucker trial down under, eating all sorts of horrible animal parts. My prediction, he'll scoff the lot and wash it down with Remainer tears. All that coming in the next hour. So the COVID inquiry is basically turning into let's have a pop at Boris Johnson, isn't it? They're queuing up to have a go. Boris, of course, gives his evidence in December, this time to Patrick Vallance putting in the boot. Loads coming in this next hour, but that's after your news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good afternoon to you, Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. It is 5:05. The Prime Minister has promised to cut taxes carefully and sustainably. Rishi Sunak, who visited a college in North London earlier, says the government can move into the next phase of fixing the economy. Now, the inflation's been halved. Speaking ahead of Wednesday's autumn statement, he identified 5 long-term goals, which include reducing debt, building sustainable energy, supporting business and delivering world-class education.
So now that inflation is halved and our growth is stronger, meaning revenues are higher, we can begin the next phase and turn our attention to cutting tax. We will do this in a serious, responsible way, based on fiscal rules to deliver sound money and alongside the independent forecasts of the Office of Budget Responsibility. And we can't do everything all at once. It will take discipline, and we need to prioritise. But over time, we can and we will cut taxes.
Well, Boris Johnson's been heavily criticised by his former chief scientific advisor. Sir Patrick Vallance has described the former Prime Minister as weak and indecisive in a daily diary entry from the time, and has told the COVID inquiry he's not convinced there was an effective operational response to limit the spread of the virus. Sir Patrick described the scale of test and trace facilities as inadequate and said the urgency of action across Whitehall wasn't as consistent or as reliable as it should have been. Sir Patrick was also asked whether Boris Johnson was bamboozled by the science and graphs.
Well, I think I'm right in saying that the Prime Minister at the time gave up science when he was 15. And I think he'd be the first to admit it wasn't his forte, and that he did struggle with some of the concepts, and we did need to repeat them often. Certainly when I left a meeting, I would usually be persuaded that we had got him to understand what it was we were trying to say. But as one of the extracts showed that you put up there, that 6 hours later he might not have remembered what was in that presentation.
4 men have been convicted of murdering a woman who was shot with a machine gun in Liverpool. Ashley Dale died after being found with a gunshot wound in her garden in August last year. The 28-year-old was killed when James Witham forced his way into her home and opened fire. Sean Zeiss, Niall Barry and Joseph Pearce were also found guilty of her murder. The Israeli city of Tel Aviv has come under a huge Hamas rocket attack this afternoon. More than 100 separate alerts sounded across the city, stretching as far south as Ashdod. People rushing for air raid shelters were seen as Israel's Iron Dome missile defence system intercepted multiple incoming Hamas rockets fired from Gaza. One security source has told GBNews it's the single biggest barrage aimed at Tel Aviv since the October the 7th attacks. An Irishman whose 9-year-old daughter is believed to have been kidnapped by Hamas has called for proof of life. Speaking at a press conference at the Israeli embassy in London, Thomas Hand says his Irish-Israeli daughter, Emily, was taken into Gaza.
I was, when I first thought she was dead, I could start the process of grieving for Malkis, the mother of my older 2 kids, and I could start grieving for Emily. And then, Tom, in that moment, I was just thrown back into the nightmare. And believe me, it's a nightmare.
Meanwhile, more than 24 premature babies evacuated from Al-Shifa, the hospital, have arrived in Egypt. Gaza's health ministry says a joint operation by the UN and the Palestinian Red Crescent made the move possible. The Hamas-run ministry also says an airstrike on a different hospital has killed at least 12 people. That's in the north of the territory. A drug raid's taken place in the middle of Winchester city centre at a large cannabis factory. Police have released footage of their search, where officers discovered a large number of cannabis plants. A 54-year-old man's been arrested on suspicion of producing the controlled Class B drug. He remains in custody and the plants will be destroyed. 15 Just Stop Oil activists have been arrested following a slow march through central London. The group says it's stepping up its demonstrations, demanding an end to new gas and oil licences. Dozens of protesters walked from Trafalgar Square to Whitehall on what they warned was the first of 7 days of action. The Met Police says the area was cleared quickly. Well, the Foreign Secretary has formally been introduced to the House of Lords. The former Prime Minister now takes the title Baron Cameron of Chipping Norton. Lord Cameron wore traditional scarlet robes for the ceremony, where he swore the oath of allegiance to the King. Well, we are live across the UK on TV, on digital radio, and if you want us on your smart speaker, say Play GB News. Now it is back to Martin.
Thank you, Aaron. Now, Lord David Cameron has just addressed the Global Food Security Summit as Foreign Secretary in one of his first speeches after his return to Cabinet last week. Well, we can now speak with GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Chris, so there he was, Baron Cameron of Chipping Norton, giving his first address, and he seemed quite chipper.
Yeah, he was. He joked, didn't he, about how Mrs. Cameron will be furious about being called Lady Cameron. There are always rumours, aren't there, that there was a deal done between the Camerons that Samantha Cameron would get her husband back after his political career was over. Well, he's back in the game, isn't he? 7 years after that vote to leave the European Union that prompted him to resign. He talked there, though, about changing the way we do our development. Of course, he was the original PM who brought up the amount we spend on aid to 0.7% of GDP, and it was cut down to 0.5%, wasn't it, by the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, to help find more money to pay for the COVID pandemic and, lastly, I suppose, the cost of living crisis and the war in Ukraine. Also been some criticism about the fact that some of the money has been used to house migrants in hotels who have arrived here illegally across the water from France. So, but he has said before, that was then, this is now, he's a team player, he's working with Andrew Mitchell and working with Mitchell to make sure that the aid money goes further, working alongside other countries. This food summit in Lancaster House, where I was earlier, is designed to allow developing countries to take advantage of UK technology to help work with them to develop better ways of feeding their population, rather than imposing cash on them with conditions. It's more collaborative, and that's maybe a better way of doing it.
Chris, one of the founders and the funders of this conference is Melania and Bill Gates, the foundation. And we saw at the weekend reports of David Cameron wanting to increase the foreign aid budget. This is kind of sending out a confusing message, isn't it? And this isn't what Conservatives want.
Well, yes, as I said, I mean, that was his, the 0.7% of GDP on aid was a big victory for David Cameron's government. They increased it over several years from 2010 to 2013, 2014, when they hit this 0.7%. And then, of course, as the economy grew, so did the aid budget. So by the time he left office, it was bigger than, I think, the Home Office budget and I think the prisons budget. So it was much, much bigger. And it was always contentious that the Tory right had an issue with it, but it stayed there all through the 2010s. I think Boris Johnson was keen on it. It was only cut back to 0.5% of our gross domestic product to help pay for the COVID pandemic, and that will be a live issue going forward. The deal now is it's unlikely to be able to go back to 0.7% until 2028 in the next Tory government, if they win the next election, which is not looking likely according to the polls. I don't think it's an issue yet for debate in politics, but certainly we know what David Cameron has thought in the past about this, and I bet privately he wants to go back to 0.7%, but publicly he's holding the line. 0.5% it is.
And Chris, more rumours of a rift over Rwanda, this time within the cabinet. Rishi's plan B still not landing very well, it seems.
Yeah, Plan B is, or even Plan B2 or something. There's two options, isn't there? A full fat and a semi-skin version on this, Martin, and what they do next to try and deal with this Supreme Court ruling last week. We're seeing a new treaty with Rwanda published probably on Thursday this week. Certainly, we think it's this week, which will ensure that Rwanda doesn't then take migrants who are processed in Rwanda, having brought back from the UK, and send them back to countries where they might be at risk. And then there also will be new legislation, maybe as soon as next week, which could well look at how to allow the government to redesignate Rwanda as a safe country and ensure that the human rights laws aren't used by lawyers to frustrate removing migrants from the UK to Rwanda. There is a real frustration in Number 10. They can't do this. We saw that in the statement last week from the Prime Minister. The time for talking with this government is over. We're seeing language today also on tax cuts, as you've been hearing on the programme. There will be some tax cuts, almost certainly signalled or even announced, and maybe even personal taxes too, not just for businesses, as soon as Wednesday's autumn statement. So I think there's been a year of talking from this Prime Minister, Mr Sunak. I think the time of action is coming, both on small boats and on tax.
Well, let's hope we see some action soon, Chris. Superb as ever. Thank you, Chris Hope, for joining us live from Westminster. Now, moving on. The COVID inquiry continues, and today was the turn of former Chief Scientific Advisor Sir Patrick Vallance, who you may remember from our endless press officers. He said the Prime Minister at the time struggled by the graphs and data presented to him during the pandemic and was sometimes a broken man. He also said that he was concerned at times the government's operational response at limiting the spread of the virus in the early stages of the pandemic. Well, now, We can speak with Charles Persinger, who lost his wife and his mother to COVID. Charles, thanks for joining us on the show. The COVID inquiry rumbles on. Today, Sir Patrick Vallance saying Boris struggled with concept and was often bamboozled. When you look back, and by the way, very sorry for your loss, who do you hold responsible?
Yeah, the government basically do carry some responsibility for this. It's quite clearly that, you know, they claim to follow the science. It's being revealed in the COVID inquiry today that that's not the case. They didn't understand the science, let alone choose to engage with their own science advisors at SAGE concerning certain issues. For instance, today we learned in the COVID inquiry that Rishi Sunak, who as a chancellor at the time, chose not to mention their Eat Out to Help Out program. They chose not to engage with their own government advisors because they were scared of scrutiny from independent SAGE. So I think they basically picked and chose the science that was politically convenient for them. Once again, putting the economy before the welfare of the country. It's absolutely disgraceful. How much longer will the country tolerate this?
Charles, when you look back, of course, Boris Johnson, the Conservatives were in control, but we must remember that at the time, every political party nodded along and went along with this. There was no real opposition. When we look back, with the benefit of hindsight, we may have learned a more Swedish-style approach may have been warranted. Do you think this was an entire failure of the whole political class at the time?
I think personally what they did is they choose to politicize a deadly virus where they should have been looking at it as a health concern as opposed to a political issue. I mean, I know there's commonality, but they basically didn't handle it at all. The messaging was wrong. They couldn't even, between their own government, there was nothing but contempt towards one another and even more contempt towards the country. Personally, I think it's time we have a general election and the people get to choose the government they want.
Well, that's going to be coming pretty soon anyway, I would have thought, Charles. What do you make of the prospect of Boris himself taking the podium? He's going to be cross-examined, I believe, in December. What would you like to ask Boris Johnson?
Yeah, why didn't he do better? At the end of the day, his messaging was never straight. Why did he say let the bodies pile high? Why was he so happy to throw our elderly under the bus, our clinically vulnerable, and our marginalized groups of people in this country? Basically, he didn't care. That's the truth of the matter. No matter what he says, I think he still doesn't. And to be quite honest with you, I don't think the situation has improved even today.
And what confidence would you have in the UK's ability to handle a pandemic or a public health emergency of a comparable nature in the future? Do you think we've learned lessons, or do you think we'd still make the same mistakes?
Unfortunately, lessons are being learned. Whether those lessons will be adhered to, that's the problem. Are our government going to choose to listen to the inquiry, the advice they've given, or are they going to politicize another emergency? That's what I'm really concerned about. I think personally the track record is rather revealing at the moment. And to be honest, I don't have confidence in the government at the moment. Look at the results.
OK, Charles Persinger, thank you for joining us on the show. And again, I'm sorry for your loss. Have a good day. Thanks for joining us. OK, let's get back now to that speech given earlier by the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt with Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor. Liam, here we are again. He offered a bit of optimism, didn't he? But what people really want is some detail, some actual flesh on the bone, and particularly, what are those tax cuts going to look like?
He's certainly got a spring in his step. I think he's been kind of unleashed a little bit by the Prime Minister. Now inflation is down quite sharply from 6.7% during the year to September to 4.6% during the year to October. Big reduction there. We only learned about that last week. Downing Street's convinced itself that, we can juice up the economy with some tax cuts without unleashing inflation. I think a lot of panic has set in as well, because ahead of the autumn statement on Wednesday, you've got an awful lot of centre-right Tory backbenchers screaming now for tax cuts, looking at the opinion polls, seeing that Keir Starmer's 20-odd points ahead with a general election sort of hoving into view. So I think it's a combination of a bit of economic development, but also a lot of political panicking that's led to this change. So what kind of tax cuts could we see on Wednesday? Well, they may just be announcements. They may not actually come in anytime soon. They may wait until the next fiscal year, which begins in April. But let's have a look. The kind of things that have been knocking around in Sunday papers, there's lots of speculation. What are the autumn statement options? Well, the first one is to extend what we call full expensing. This is when a company makes an investment and offsets the cost of that investment in a new factory plant or new technology, new IT, against their corporation tax bill. Big businesses will like that. Small businesses not so much, because those small businesses often haven't got the money to do the investment in the first place, so they can't get or borrow the money. They can't get the tax break because their balance sheet can't stand the extra debt with interest rates still very high. Something else that's been in the offing, cutting inheritance tax. This is something that my paper, the Sunday Telegraph's been campaigning for. I actually think this is a bit like Liz Truss Kwasi Kwarteng last October saying that they'll cut the top rate of income tax. A lot of people thought, hang on, there's a cost of living crisis here. That's really tin-eared to want to cut a tax for wealthy people. Well, a lot of people don't like inheritance tax. A lot of quite modest families end up paying inheritance tax if they sell a family home for more than £1 million. But I would say it still feels like a wealthy person's tax. So I don't think that would be the right thing to do in the current climate until the cost of living crisis ease. Something else, Sunak and Hunt could unfreeze those frozen tax thresholds, raise them. These tax thresholds, the starting rate of tax, where you start paying the basic rate of income tax, where you start paying the top rate of income tax. They've been frozen. Those income levels have been frozen for a while now. They're due to be frozen until 2028. More and more people get dragged into those top tax brackets. You know, modestly paid policemen, nurses, teachers. They're suddenly top-rate taxpayers, and they weren't meant to be top-rate taxpayers. You've got to unfreeze those thresholds because they are the ultimate stealth tax. And what I've been calling for in my columns, increase the personal tax allowance. That's something the ministers are also talking about. I'm getting calls from people in government saying, interesting column on Sunday, Liam, saying that we're going to increase the personal tax allowance. Who told you? I mean, as if I'm going to say, but no one told me, I just made it up. Journalists can have independent thoughts. Yeah. If we do raise the tax threshold from 12.5 grand to 20 grand, you take out of tax 3-4 million low-paid people. You take out of tax pensioners who receive the basic state pension, because those pensions now are going up. They're going to be caught by that tax bracket. I think that would be a really bold thing to do. I also reject the notion from lots of Whitehall economists it would cost a huge amount of money to raise the personal tax allowance from 12.5 to 20 grand, because it would lead to more activity, Martin, less benefit payments at the lower income, less in-work benefits, and you get more economic growth, and that's how you get your money back, and in my view, and more.
Fantastic. As always, Liam Halligan on the money. We get lots more on that story on our website, and thanks to you, GBNews.com is the fastest growing national news website in the country. It's got breaking news and all the brilliant analysis you've come to expect from GB News. So thanks to all of you for making that happen. Now, coming up, there are real fears that pro-Palestinian protests may turn increasingly violent in the days ahead. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, and this is Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Just before 5:25, you're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, Tel Aviv has come under a huge Hamas rocket attack in this last hour. More than 100 separate alerts sounded right across the city, stretching as far south as Ashdod. For the latest, our security editor Mark White joins us now live in the studio. Mark, dramatic events. Talk us through the latest.
Yeah, we're looking at one of the videos there that shows some of the Iron Dome missile defence systems going into the air as these sirens sounded right across Tel Aviv to as far south as Ashdod. Right, from the north to the south to the east of Tel Aviv, more than 100 separate alerts as these rockets were fired in from Gaza and caused a number of impacts. We're still awaiting word on if there were any injuries, but we know that there were impacts. There was a vehicle that was damaged on one of the main road networks. The driver of that vehicle had a lucky escape. You can see the rocket damage on the ground there. And that vehicle is a white vehicle just to the side. It's just the back of the vehicle that was damaged. But shrapnel, obviously, from that rocket impacting the back of that car. So whoever was in that vehicle was very lucky.
Lucky escape.
They weren't struck by the shrapnel, and as well as the damage to this vehicle and the lucky escape of that driver, there was an apartment building you see here that suffered an impact as well, caused significant damage on the upper floors of that apartment. And what it goes to show you is that 45 days after the operation began to go after Hamas in the Gaza Strip, they still have very significant capabilities to launch this rocket attack into Tel Aviv. If we look at this app here, you can see this is a mobile phone app. That shows you the number of separate alerts, the huge capability that Hamas still has from its underground layers, from these tunnels that they pop up from, and they just fire off these rockets towards Israel's civilian populations.
And Mark, another hugely contentious aspect of this war, of course, is Hamas using hospitals as shields, or actually having operations within them. The Al-Shifa hospital, of course, the biggest and the most talked about, and there's a dramatic development on that front too.
Yes, Al-Shifa is the hospital which is currently the subject of a ground operation by Israel. The forces of the IDF have gone into that hospital and have spent the last few days searching around that area, very controversially, condemned by many people, saying they have no right to be in there. Israel has always claimed that the hospital complex has been used by Hamas, and now some of the 300 Hamas prisoners that the Israelis have in their custody who've been interviewed have admitted, yes, that up to 100 Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists operated from inside the Al-Shifa hospital, dressed, they say, in medical gear and porter's clothing, in scrubs, to try and blend in. This is what one of those terrorists who was being interviewed told his interrogators, which was captured on video.
I saw a lot of them, about 80, 90, 100. It reached 100 people. Whose people? The terrorists? Hamas terrorists. Hamas and Islamic Jihad. In the hospital, in the Shifa hospital, in the heart of the Shifa hospital. Shifa, not the Al-Quds. Shifa. They were dressed as nursing staff, but they were not nurses or doctors. Hamas operatives dressed as medical staff in order to blend in within the hospital wards, even in the intensive care unit.
So he's saying there, Hamas terrorists dressing as doctors and nurses and using directly the hospital as cover. That's a huge admission.
And he also said that the doctors at the Al-Shifa hospital knew about the fact that these terrorists were there in the midst and were very angry, understandably, that the hospital was being used by these terrorists. Now, this is very different to what these same medics have been saying to anyone who listened about the Israeli military targeting Al-Shifa and other hospitals in the Gaza Strip, saying that they are wholly innocent in terms of any involvement with terrorist groups. They know nothing, they have said, about terrorists operating from in and around the Al-Shifa hospital. But as well as what the Israelis have got in terms of that interrogation, this is video of hostages, according to the IDF, being taken in to the Al-Shifa hospital, one on a stretcher, another being bungled in there, surrounded by Hamas terrorists, some with their automatic rifles, in full view of medical staff in their scrubs there. Those hostages being taken, according to the IDF, off down into the tunnel systems, where they either remain today or some worse fate has affected them, and hopefully they're still alive. But it's going to be very, very difficult for the IDF to get down into these hundreds of miles of tunnels that have been pre-prepared and booby-trapped by the Hamas terrorists to try to obviously entrap the IDF forces when they go down into the tunnel systems.
And Mark, the hugely contentious issue of the IDF targeting hospitals might start to make a bit more sense if, in actual fact, this is accurate and true, and Hamas are specifically using the disguise of fancy dress to evade being targeted and to use hospitals to take hostages into. This is a huge revelation.
Yeah, I mean, what the IDF say is they don't strike hospitals, and they maintain they have not struck hospitals as such. They have, though, launched attacks on Hamas infrastructure very near some of Gaza's hospitals. They've gone in on the ground on Gaza's hospitals. In some cases, they have been involved in firefights from Hamas terrorists that they say have been embedded in these hospitals and firing outside. Al-Shifa, they went in without firing any shots, and they're systematically looking around this vast hospital complex. They're uncovering tunnels and other evidence that they say points to the fact Hamas was using this hospital.
And Mark White, thank you. Astonishing revelations. Well, there's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock. And the Office for National Statistics is being criticised for significantly overestimating the number of trans people in England and Wales. And we'll find out why shortly. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Good evening to you. It is 5:32. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's promised tax cuts to boost economic growth and reward hard work ahead of Wednesday's autumn statement. The Prime Minister, who visited a college in North London, says the government can move into the next phase of fixing the economy now that inflation's been halved, but says any tax cuts will be made carefully and sustainably. He's identified 5 long-term goals, which include reducing debt, building sustainable energy, supporting business and delivering world-class education. The government's former chief scientific advisor has heavily criticised Boris Johnson, telling the COVID inquiry he's not convinced there was an effective operational response to limit the spread of the virus. Sir Patrick Vallance described the former Prime Minister as weak and indecisive in his diary entries, adding he was frequently bamboozled by the science. Sir Patrick also said former Health Secretary Matt Hancock had a habit of saying things that weren't true. 4 men have been convicted of murdering Ashley Dale, who was shot with a machine gun in Liverpool last year. The 28-year-old was killed when James Witham forced open the door of her home and opened fire. Sean Zeiss and Niall Barry were also found guilty after the jury heard they'd organised and encouraged the killing following a fight with the victim's boyfriend, while Joseph Pears was identified as a fellow foot soldier. They'll be sentenced on Wednesday. And Israel's come under a huge Hamas rocket attack this afternoon. More than 100 separate alerts sounded across Tel Aviv, stretching as far south as Ashdod. People were seen rushing for air raid shelters. Israel's Iron Dome missile defence system intercepted multiple incoming rockets fired from Gaza. One security source has told GB News it's the biggest barrage aimed at Tel Aviv since the October the 7th attacks. And 15 Just Stop Oil activists have been arrested following a slow march through central London. The group says it's stepping up its demonstrations, demanding an end to new gas and oil licences. Dozens of protesters walked from Trafalgar Square to Whitehall on what they warned was the first of 7 days of action. The Met Police, though, said the area was cleared quickly. And we'll have more at the top of the next hour, or you can get more now on our website, gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And a final look at the markets for the day. The pound buys you at $1.2516, €1.1429 euros. Gold will cost £1,578.45 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 closed the day at 7,496 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And thank you, Aaron. Now, the Office for National Statistics is being criticised for significantly overestimating the number of trans people in England and Wales. According to the findings of the 2021 census, there were 262,000 transgender people living in England and Wales, which would be an equivalent of 0.5% of the population. But just how credible is this estimation? Well, joining me now to discuss this is the executive editor of Sex Matters, a human rights organisation that campaigns for clarity on sex in law and everyday life. Welcome to the show, Maya Forstater. Thanks for joining us on the show. Always a pleasure. So, can you talk us through how we got to this figure of 262,000, but actually it seems to be massively overestimating the numbers? What's going on?
It does. Well, this is the first time the census is done every 10 years, and this is the first time this question's been asked. And the way that the ONS decided to ask the question was they didn't ask, are you trans? They asked everybody over the age of 16, is the gender you identify the same as the sex that was recorded at birth? Your sex recorded at birth. It's quite a difficult question to understand. And 262,000 people said no, their sex, that the gender they identify is not the same as their sex recorded at birth. And the question is, how many of those people really meant to say no, meaning I'm transgender, and how many people meant to say, no, I don't understand the question, or no, I'm not transgender? And we think quite a lot of them. There are a lot of clues that show that people got the question wrong. For example, the areas with the highest rates of transgender people were boroughs like Newham, Brent, Tower Hamlets, places where lots more people speak English as a second language. And there were very high rates of apparently transgender people in these boroughs. And so the question is, are there really lots of transgender people in these boroughs, or is it that a lot of people didn't understand the question because the ONS asked it in a way that doesn't make sense? I mean, even if English is your first language, it's a really hard question to understand.
And Maya, an astonishing finding that came out of this report is that people whose first language was not English were 4 times more likely to say they were trans. And what happened, I mean, I know Barnet, I know Brent, I know Brighton. Apparently, there are more trans people in Brent than Brighton. Clearly, that's not the case, is it?
That seems like common sense to you and me and to the academics who looked at it. But the ONS is sticking to their guns, and after the census they do some checking. They do some telephone calls where they ring a much smaller number of people to check whether they answered the questions correctly to see if they're accurate. And they found that a lot of the people who on paper said they were trans, when they rang them up, said, no, that wasn't how I meant to answer the question. And they've disregarded that. They've said, oh, well, maybe those people were living in a household where they didn't want to the other people who live with them to overhear that they're trans, which is just bizarre. You know, if you live with your family, they're going to know whether they're not the kind of thing that you can keep secret within a family.
And Mayor, this matters, doesn't it? Because if we have a gross overrepresentation of a social group that's being used quite often to shoehorn in policy change in terms of education and health provision, if the numbers are entirely inaccurate, then it blows the bottom out of the case for being so obsessed with trans ideology, does it?
Absolutely, and it undermines our whole understanding of what's going on. You know, if you think that 1 in 200 people are trans, then when children turn up in school in the numbers that they are, saying that they have gender dysphoria and they identify as the opposite sex, that will be seen as being, oh, well, you know, 1 in 200 people are trans, so let's transition these children, rather than this is something that we've never seen before. What's going on here? What's going on with the mental health of these children? And similarly, if you think that 1 in 200 people are trans and then they don't turn up in your employment, in your healthcare, in your universities and so on, Stonewall and other organisations will say, oh, well, we need a great big programme of spending to make sure that 1 in 200 university students are trans, or 1 in 200 employees are trans. But if the original figure of 1 in 200 was complete nonsense, then you're just creating the opportunity for these organisations to have more influence on organisations and create more damage.
And Mayor, census data is meant to be about the truth. It's meant to be immutable facts. And yet, if we have such a margin of error, Mayor, would you say that the 2021 census, in terms of its trans representation, isn't worth the paper it's written on?
I would. I mean, the statistics regulator still gets the final say, and they have to look at the data and say whether this is up to scratch to be called national statistics. They don't have to decide for the whole. I mean, they could say most of the census is fine, but this question is not reliable, and they could just say this is not national statistics. Handle this with extreme care. You cannot use this data to make decisions on because it's not reliable.
Mayor Forsyther, Executive Director of Sex Matters, thank you very much for joining us on GB News today. Wow. OK, there's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock, including Nigel Farage, of course, is down under. We'll be looking ahead to tonight's grim Bush Tucker trial in which he has a stomach-churning challenge.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to show 5:45. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on our various topics today. Firstly, on taxes. Adrian says this: it's about time the government stopped taxing pensions or pensioners. You work all your life and you pay your taxes, and then you lose a little bit you tried to save to make your old age a little more comfortable. A lot of people will agree with that. Bob says this: we keep hearing about the autumn statement. One tax not mentioned is VAT. What about lowering the rate on single items under £5,000 but raising it for single items over £5,000? That way, the better off who buy the bigger items would pay more tax. Great common sense. Probably that's why it'll never catch on. Meanwhile, regarding protests, Michael says this: I think that if people want to hold protests that will involve the use of police resources, then these protesters must pay for the policing costs in advance and any damage done to property. This must be a sensible route, as these marches are becoming more expensive for the police and taxpayer. Don't forget, 15 arrests today at Just Stop Oil. A lot of people saying, thank goodness for that. Finally, no more tea and sympathy, but let's get in the back of a riot van. Meanwhile, Steve says this: Martin, listening to Lord Cameron's speech, when will this Tory party get it? No one's interested in foreign policy or chucking millions of third world countries to third world countries. When will they stop the boats, get rid of the illegals and have a police force that's not dual standard? Again, a lot of people will be agreeing with every word you said there. Meanwhile, Gordon says this: we have a Prime Minister with no mandate and a Foreign Secretary who literally walked in off the street. I don't care what they have to say, they are unelected. OK, fantastic stuff. Keep them coming in all the usual ways. gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, moving on to the grand finale of the show and tonight's big treat. GB News' own Nigel Farage started his jungle journey last night as I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here returned to our screens, and let's have a sneak preview of what's to come.
Slightly different for you. This is a margarita.
Nice.
A camel udder.
Wow.
And a sheep udder with a cow's teat.
There's nothing.
Did you prepare this yourselves, guys?
Not personally, no.
We can't take all the credit.
Nigel, you're smashing it. You're smashing it. This is
Bit blooming tough.
Oh, Farage! Farage!
There's Nigel tucking into the margarita, and that's a pun on the fact it's a pizza, a margarita with teats on it, udders and all sorts of other bodily parts. And of course, you can watch that latest episode tonight on 9 p.m. on ITV. I'm joined now by Richard Tice, leader of the Reform Party and GB News colleague in the studio. In many ways, we can't wait to see it. But to be honest, that doesn't look worse than many of the buffets Nigel would have eaten in Brussels.
Well, there is that too. This is the hat. He looks good in the hat, don't you think? I mean, he looks very comfortable, very relaxed down there. I mean, I thought last night was fantastic. He showed calm, serious leadership when all else around him was collapsing and squealing and screaming. He seemed quite comfortable with snakes around his head. I wonder where, Martin, he got that from. Do you think that was too many snakes in the European Parliament and around Brussels?
That's right, all that slime and sleaze. I mean, it's almost like he was made for the job, Richard. But on a serious point, it's obviously dividing audiences, but one thing we've seen is that the Keiths and the Linders, as Anton Deck called them, the GB News viewers, are right behind their man. Do you think he's got a sniff of winning it?
Oh, I think he's got an absolute cracking chance. I mean, look, there's lots of competition. There are rumours that there's at least one more contestant going to come into the show, possibly two. So lots to look forward to. But I think he's got a cracking chance. Josie Gibson, obviously, a real favourite. But listen, it is quite funny that the lefties who don't like Nigel, they've got a choice. They either don't watch it. They tried to organise a boycott. But actually, the truth is, millions and millions of people have already started watching it. Millions, I think, are clearly going to vote for Nigel to do some horrific things, horrific trials on the way through, just to see how he responds. I think he'll do extremely well, actually. I've just got a strong sense of it. But in our show later on, so I'm hosting his show this week, and we've got Fatima Whitbread coming in. Great. She, of course, was a contestant back in, I think, 2011, did really, really well.
She's brilliant.
So she will be able to explain sort of the pressures behind the scene, what goes on, what it's like living with a camera on you all the time, and whether or not you've got to be discreet, thoughtful, or whether you just sort of live your life regardless.
And Richard, it's very much looking like Nigel may win the dubious honour of winning more Bush Tucker trials than Matt Hancock. It's looking that way. I think they'll keep trying to shove it down his throat. They'll kind of chuck everything they can at him, onto him, and all the rest of it. You know Nigel perhaps more than most. Do you think that will bother him, or do you think he'll just rise to the challenge and soak it all up?
Nigel is a very competitive man, particularly against someone like Mr Hancock, who I don't think he would ever describe himself in a complimentary way. So he will be determined to beat Hancock in every sense possible in terms of the success of the trials. And Hancock was pretty successful last year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he's got a pretty high bar to match, but he will be going for it. He'll be absolutely determined. He will not want these trials to get ahead of him, however disgusting and revolting. I mean, dear old Nella last night, I mean, she squealed and screamed at the first sight of a snake, for heaven's sake.
Yeah. I wonder if that tip was waited on the desk. Could we pop it on? Could we have a look at it?
What do you think? Just a certain style? Do you think maybe I'll get the call up next year? Do you think, Martin?
And there's a bit of the Indiana Joneses going on there. I think that's rather debonair. I saw some footage of you playing your didgeridoo. Where's your didge?
Well, actually, we're still looking for the didgeridoo because the one that I was practicing on last week, that was elsewhere. But there is one in the building here. We think someone's actually practicing and has nicked it. So we may have to order a second or a third didgeridoo. We might actually have a competition. They're not easy to play. Have you ever played a didgeridoo?
I have, and I've got to say, I'm not bad. I did live...
here we are. It's all coming out now. A sign of a misspent youth if you're a good didgeridoo blower.
Well, I did live down under for a couple of years in Sydney, and I did go to the odd rave, and I did play the odd didgeridoo. And I think, another thing that I think will go down very well with Nigel is that they like people like him down under because he's that proper Brit spirit, and I think he's got a really good stuff. And if he gets to the final, it'll be a de facto Brexit referendum.
Oh, wow, just imagine, particularly if it's someone like Fred. I mean, there's a number of people who are proper Remainers amongst that group. So, yeah, just imagine a sort of a Brexit, like a sort of Remain or Leave final. I mean, it would be an absolute hoot. We'll have the whole country watching.
Richard Tice, thanks for joining us in the studio. And that's tonight at 9 o'clock, of course. And I'm joined in the studio before that by Michelle Dewberry. Jubes and Co, of course, at 6 o'clock.
I just walked into the studio to hear you two grown men talking about blowing your didgeridoos. I wondered what on earth I walked into this tea time hour, so I did. Anyway, yes, on my shirt there would be no didgeridoos, unfortunately. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but there's not anyway. A didgeridoo definitely don't. It's not a good look, is it, when you wear this matte lipstick? Anyway, I want to talk to you about Royal Mail, foreign workers as well, whether or not we should be making it easier or harder for companies to employ people from overseas. And I want to get stuck into these protests that are taking place outside of MPs' offices. And a lot of MPs at the moment are whipping up hatred towards MPs that have the audacity to vote against a ceasefire in Gaza, or perhaps even abstain from voting at all. What is the answer to some of this? Do we need exclusion zones set up outside of offices, or is it just par for the course on their job, or what?
Well, it does seem to me, Michelle...
I said all that without taking a breath.
She'd be great on the didgeridoo.
I was rehearsing. I was practising my breath work then for my didgeridoo after hours.
Circular breathing. I think you'd be a corker at that. So it's Jubes and Co coming up at 6 o'clock. Thank you. I'm back same time tomorrow, 3 till 6. But don't go anywhere. We've got Jubes and Co coming up right after this break. No didgeridoos, but lots of fun to be had.
Hello, it's Aidan McKibben here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. A lot of cloud across the UK today, with showers continuing in places, but it does turn drier overnight. Tuesday and Wednesday are looking mostly dry across the UK. We've got the weekend's area of low pressure moving away to the east. High pressure trying to build in from the northwest, but in between, a lot of cloud across the UK during the evening. Further spells of rain or showers, especially for eastern Scotland, down the east coast of England. Parts of the Midlands, Wales and the southwest also seeing a few showers for a time before it turns drier later. By the end of the night, the cloudy skies and the showery rain mostly affecting North Sea coastal counties. Drier and clearer skies elsewhere, especially for Scotland and Northern Ireland, where temperatures in some places will dip to -2 to -4 Celsius. So chilly but bright start for Northern Ireland and Scotland first thing. Plenty of sunshine here early on. A lot of cloud elsewhere. Low cloud, mist and fog for East Anglia and the southeast, and some showery rain continuing here into the afternoon. Elsewhere, it's a largely dry and bright autumn day, crisp blue skies, but Sunshine turning hazy across Scotland and Northern Ireland later as the next system starts to move in. That will bring breezy and wet conditions for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England during Wednesday. A drier and brighter start to the day for the south of the UK, but even here it will cloud over with some spots of rain later. Thursday sees rain sink south, followed by much colder conditions for the end of the week.
Who is it? We're here for the show.